because it's my understanding that that rail line is not just for grain trains, which is very interesting to me. I wonder what else gets transported on there. If it's the only line to Sevastopol, I presume that lots of other really interesting things get transported. And then second in the nest, you will find the calendar with the events in it. I'm just going to open it up here and take a look. So second in the nest is the calendar. The very first link there is the actual calendar that we refer to. Go ahead, Jacoby.
No, I go right ahead and I'll come after that.
Sure. So we started a calendar because I don't know if you've ever tried to use the Spaces calendars and notifications, but sometimes they don't work very well. And there's also tons of other really interesting things that come up in a week that we kind of occasion past. And so we wanted to have one place to put all of those, and that's what that calendar is. On today's link for the calendar, you will find a link to Liberty Ukraine and some fundraising they're doing. There's also a link to a talk about how OSINT has changed journalism, which I am super excited to listen back to. I hadn't had a chance to get in there yet. But yeah, I absolutely encourage you to go click around in that calendar. I almost always find something in there to listen to if I'm looking for something. And most of the time, if you've missed something, there's still a link to those events that you can go back and listen to them after the fact. Jacoby?
Yeah, I also just wanted to let people in the space know that we have a guest co-host today, John Ridge, who's joined us for at least a little while, as long as he can. John is, among many, many, many other things, often can be found in the Tochny weekly Ukraine bulletin and the Tochny talks that we often share to people who come in the space. And he joins us today, which is really great.
We're going to talk planes and missiles.
Hi, guys. Is my mic coming through now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Apologies for that. I apparently my microphone audio out was working to you guys, but I couldn't hear anything that was being said, so I just had to restart my emulator. But I'm back now. Thanks very much to my co-hosts for covering for a minute or two there. Hopefully, I'm not duplicating things, but thanks very much for joining us, everybody. For those who have never been with us before, this is a space where we cover the news, but then we try to add in a heavy dose of additional news that's gathered from open sources, whether you call it open source intelligence or open source analysis, and mostly from great sources here on Twitter. In addition, we try to highlight tools and techniques so that whether you're new to OSINT or you've been working on it for a while, we can try and bring everybody's skill level up. And then often we'll have people come in to speak about the specific projects that they're working on in an effort to highlight the great work that people here on Twitter are doing, and in an effort to try to foster collaboration. Tonight, we are going to basically just be going through updates. We are still hoping to do a conversation about jamming, both looking at some projects on jamming and sort of the background technologies on it. Because we do this twice a week, we're trying to line up guests, but sometimes they don't always line up on the schedule we would hope for. So that's something we're still working on, but we're not going to get to that tonight. Once again, if you've never been here before, my spaces rely heavily on the use of the nest, which is the area at the top of the window where there are links to individual tweets. I do that partly so that you don't have to take my word for it. I try to bring sourcing for almost everything that I bring up. Also, if you like any of the content that we discuss, any of the topics, and you want to go away for further reading, then it's available to you. If you have a look at the item in the nest that's at the furthest right, that is the invitation to the space. But if you click on it, then below it are essentially my speaking notes or agenda. In that way, if you want to click into that thread and then scroll down, you can look ahead at what we'll be discussing. It might prompt you to generate some questions or comments. If at any time during the conversation you'd like to jump in with a question or comment, please just do hit the microphone button in the bottom left of the Spaces window. And of course, if you are enjoying what you're hearing, we do like to get as many people into the conversation as possible. So you can always tweet the space out to draw in a few more people. And that button is in the bottom right-hand side. Okay. We're just juggling some administrative things in the background. Sorry for that. So thanks to my co-hosts for highlighting the calendar and some of the upcoming events. I'd like to run through resources that have cropped up in the last couple of days. Often there are some great tools, some great podcasts. So I'll start. I will start with the podcasts. So if you have a look, it's the second item from the right up in the nest, or excuse me, the third from the right up in the nest. The first is a conversation that was put on by the U.S. Global Initiative. So it's the 15 Minutes in Defense of Democracy podcast. And it's a conversation with Razum for Ukraine, which is one of the better known fundraising organizations. And they're discussing the impact that delays in weapons transfers have caused in terms of Ukrainian casualties, which is, of course, a heavy topic, but it's important to keep in mind, while we're having all these ongoing debates about what equipment will be provided. There is a new episode of the Russia Contingency, which is the podcast that Michael Kaufman puts on, hosted by War on the Rocks. He spoke with Dara Massicott of the RAND Institute, and they went through an analysis of Gerasimov's leadership during the war. Unfortunately, that podcast is subscriber only, but if you happen to have subscribed, I know some of you have in the past for good past conversations. That's this week's. There was a conversation in podcast form put on by the Atlantic Council discussing what are the expectations for the upcoming Ukrainian counteroffensive. And that was actually held just this morning. And I believe the full video is available via that tweet. There is a talk that was on, I believe, also this morning at 11 a.m., put on by the Center for European Policy Analysis. And it was a conversation on attempts to protect Crimean, Tatar, and Ukrainian culture, as this was an anniversary in connection with deportation of the Tatars under the Soviets. So that's a timely item. And then finally, there was an episode of a podcast called the NDS Show, which I'm not particularly familiar with, but the guest of that episode was OSINT Technical, who does a great job here on Twitter. And the conversational topic was just general OSINT and tradecraft. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. So I think that was it for podcasts. I'm just setting up John again, and we should be able to keep going. So I have a couple of tweets up in the nest. It's the fourth and fifth from the right, and these are some resources. So the first item, if you want to have a look at that post, the first item is to note that an iOS version of ChatGPT put out by the OpenAI organization has just become available. And I know that some of us have been playing with that, just in general, also potentially for research or data gathering purposes. So it may be a little bit more convenient to have it in app form on your phone. However, the second item is a tweet. Here, I'll put this up individually. It's a tweet by Breck Castell. He's just highlighting the idea that just because, AI is a tool, and so it can be something that can assist in research, but at the same time, it has lots of limitations. I think we've probably all seen posts about some of these tools generating imaginary sources when asked to bring up references. In this example that Breck had put up, it was from a researcher who he said that he had put out a single tweet saying that he was a famous banjo player, along with two sort of random friends of his, who neither of whom are musicians or banjo players. And then interestingly, running a search on it the very next day, using Bing Chat, it came back and, he asked it the question, am I a banjo player? And if so, where am I from? And it went away and it managed to find his post from the other day. And based on that solo post, it said, yes, he is a banjo player and that he's from this fake country. So this is to highlight the idea that, if that post wasn't your own for experimental purposes, then a single post about a person could potentially be used to seed misinformation in responses from AI. And so Brecht is just cautioning us all that, be aware of how these tools work, not only for your own sake when doing research, but then also, that maybe broader thought is required about what the standard of verification for some of these tools should be. Continuing on with the resources, I'll put this one up individually. For those of you who are interested in cyber developments, this is an individual who is trying to keep track sort of the order of battle or the relationship among various Russian government affiliated cyber organizations. And that there have been some, I understand this is something he's been working on for a while. And there had been some updates with the Vulcan disclosures and a few other charges that the U.S. Department of Justice have made in the last few weeks. So this is an updated version. And so if you follow the cyber aspect of things, you might enjoy that. I also wanted to highlight there was a note that went up this week. I'll put it to the front of the nest so you can find it more readily. That if you happen to use Telegram at all, there's a vulnerability that has been discovered, particularly on the Mac OS, that will allow for close to root user access, including to microphone and screen recording. And so you probably don't want that to happen. I do occasionally use Telegram. I don't use it on the Mac desktop OS, but it's just a reminder to be careful about vulnerabilities like that. And if it's a piece of technology that you think is risky, then take appropriate precautions, whether it's running it in an emulator or through VPN. I understand that VPN doesn't solve this particular problem, but it's just a reminder of just general good digital hygiene. And the final in this particular tweet, I will put this up to the front of the nest as well. It was the development of an interactive data set on the development of an interactive data set on reported civilian harms during the Battle of Kharkiv, which it looks like they did a really terrific job mapping it out and attaching whatever imagery, video, photographs they could, in order to develop these detailed efforts. They often have to be time limited and geography limited, but it's still great to see organizations out there really documenting these sorts of things. I suspect that this sort of original documentation certainly has the potential to be helpful in future trials, whether war crimes or otherwise. I had a few more resources that I wanted to highlight. Oh, actually, I think I'm on to, so in addition to resources, I like to gather together some good examples of OSINT from the last few days. So I'll run through a few of those. Oh, actually, I see that Aaron's joined us and he has his hand up. So Aaron, did you want to speak to anything I've mentioned?
Yeah, just quickly, Michael, about ChatGPT. It's quite something, I'll tell you. But thank goodness for national security purposes, it will not, if you ask it anything, say, how do I build an atomic bomb, stuff like that, it says, cannot come up with that information, whatnot. So luckily on a national security standpoint, it's very good on that. It has its stopgaps, which is quite important. I worry about people's critical thinking when being in their minds becoming indolent and just using ChatGPT to do a lot of the critical thinking. That's something that's, in a general sense you worry about. But it is great for military history, military analysis. I've been using it for that stuff, for different, coming up with different aspects of things. And I think it's a great tool. Of course, everybody worries about the different aspects it could be used for, but it's pretty awesome overall. And for those who don't know me, I'm Aaron Bulma, host of the Bauma Report and military analyst and historian. Thanks.
Can I speak on that for a second, Michael?
Sure, go ahead, Jacob.
Okay, when ChatGPT 3 first came out, and not even 4. Now, some of the capabilities have been muted over time, but there's still a lot of jailbreaks and workarounds. There was a fantastic individual who is literally a living angel. His name is Chris F. Some of you may know him. And he initiated this activity to create a white paper on GPT-3 capabilities. Now, we totally built nuclear reactors, and we totally, we got it to start building or creating the knowledge base for how to build nuclear reactors and all sorts of incredible and horrifying things. And we even got it to create classes on how to build nuclear reactors for, people with the capability of even an 8 to 10-year-old. Okay, so it does have these capabilities if you know how to prompt the AI to actually admit that it's not just a little old language machine. Once you get past a few jailbreaks, it totally does have that knowledge and capability. So I just want to throw that out there. And it's very important for us to realize that and to create security measures around things of that nature, because it's a very powerful tool for any one person to start utilizing. That is all. Thank you very much.
If I may respond to that, I totally agree with you, because I thank goodness with ChatGPT 4 and the systems now, the blocks now. I really hope that they will continue to make sure that that's ironclad and try to stop the workarounds, because it's kind of like moding a game. Like it's a computer system, so you can modify it, and that's, you can hack it, and that's where the problem comes in. So I totally agree with you. I totally get you there. I know what you mean exactly. I mean, I was worried, and I should have brought that up as well, because it's like ChatGPT, the earlier versions, like the hacks are probably still going widely out there for that, and that's another worry, right?
Okay, thanks, guys. So I did want to get into what I think are some interesting examples of OSINT from the last couple of days since we had our last space. I'm just moving some of these to the front of the nest so that you can see them individually. So if you'll bear with me. The first of which was a thread put together by, a friend of the space, frequent speaker, OSINT Mischief, or Intel Schizo is his handle, and there were these claims that in connection with a Russian strike, they were putting out the misinformation that the strike may have hit an ammunition depot, and that depot could have held depleted uranium munitions or rounds, and hopefully it should populate up in the nest in just a moment. OSINT Mischief's breakdown of how that's not the case, and how the local radiation detectors detected hardly any change, and it was a well thought out response to it. So I wanted to highlight it as an effort from somebody who we regularly interact with that I think got a bit of traction. The second item in the nest is just because once again, a lot of our conversation tonight will be about Ukraine, but we do want to cover OSINT in general from lots of locations around the world. And so that's a tweet from Damien Simon, who regularly looks at satellite photography. And it was understood that a new submarine base was being built in Bangladesh, and he's now gotten some of the first satellite imagery of the completed structure. So I just wanted to put that up there as a reminder that we're not just talking about Ukraine. We're happy to talk about other places around the world as well. And Damien does great work, so keep an eye out for him. Random, you have your hand up.
No, I know there's several things we can get into that topic about what's going on at Kalmanitsky, which is the site that was hit that Schizo talked about, and John also talked about, because of all the misinformation going around there. But we can get into that later. I figure I just did that. It was a really good thing to highlight. I knew several groups of people who, when they first saw that, it's like, yeah, that's not what people are claiming it is. And then they did dig deeper, and I can go into that later. But just wanted to throw that out there.
I don't know that we're going to come back around to it. So if you have any points you'd like to make, I'd say go ahead now, or forever.
So there's a broader theme that's being noticed when it comes, so I have a theory that I've been working with Schizo, and a couple of people have given us some resources, like the old allocation of Soviet troops up until 1991 and the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the old bases and stuff like that. And the thing that's easily noticeable is between what happened last week or a couple of weeks ago at the Pavlorad site and the Kalmanitsky site, and also a strike on possibly I need to get geo confirmation information on that with Chernobyl. Is these are all old sites that were used by the Soviet military that are no longer in use or used as basically storage sites. But what the theory is that you can align the whole thing with like these strikes that have taken place with these explosions that have been highlighted also allocate with old ammunition depots and bases that were used back 20 something years ago, 20, 30 years ago. So that's kind of something I'm trying to look into when it comes to these more recent strikes. I do know that we're going to get into air defenses and all that here later, but it was an interesting coincidence that in addition to the depleted uranium thing, and I think this is a good thing that John pointed out since he's here, just praise him for this, is the point out is that everybody relies on using the idea of uranium as radioactive, and they don't really go into what makes radiation, which is, oh my God, look at the levels of gamma radiation that have increased since this. And it's like the easiest way to dispute that, which is way John did, which is depleted uranium uses alpha emitters. It's not even gamma radiation, it's alpha radiation. So I think that's an interesting thing to point out, is like, because that's also just like half-lives and stuff like that. We think of like ammo and stuff like that. We don't talk about like the chemistry and the radiation and radioactivity and all that until stuff like this comes into play.
Yeah, it was it was a silly claim, and really it was just an excuse to raise the specter of depleted uranium again. So I can't remember the name of that law, but that it takes 10 times as much work to refute bad information as it takes to come up with it. So I appreciate all those out there who put time in to pushing the truth, including Schizo and John. So continuing on, a couple of examples. I mentioned Damien talking about this submarine base in Bangladesh, and I thought that was an excellent setup for the next point, which is the third item. Which is the third item from Covert Shores, H.I. Sutton. This one's pretty funny. Apparently there was this photograph that went around where people had thought there was a mystery submarine in Finland. And, you can tell when you look at the zoomed out version that it could totally be mistaken for a submarine just sailing along on the surface. But the mystery was solved when people had a closer look. Presumably they just asked locals. And it turns out that it's a small rock with a lighthouse on it. And I only bring this one up as an example. We often will hear people say, know what's normal before you start raising alarms. So I thought that was a funny example that fit in with the submarine. But moving along, the fourth item there, it's a tweet by Marcus Johnson. And Marcus does great work tracking ships. We've previously featured work from Marcus on gaps in AIS coverage around the Kerch Strait that helped to reveal apparently jamming in that area. This particular tweet is interesting. It's about a research ship called the Professor Logachev, and tracking its movement through the Atlantic, including sailing over and like paying close attention, which is determined because the ship would have a normal cruising speed, but then it would slow down and linger for quite a while and potentially, take some loops back and forth over some specific positions on the seafloor. And a few places that it stopped are places that it had stopped previously that are known to be international communications cable locations. And then interestingly, it continued out much further into the Atlantic than the people watching it had noticed before. And in this case, then repeated that behavior of lingering over one spot sort of in the middle of the Atlantic as if there was something significant there. And it's not clear whether it was observing or whether it was carrying out work, but it has created a bit of a mystery. So keep your eyes on Marcus. And if you're somebody who likes tracking ships, then maybe this is a mystery that is worth you taking a look at. Exit, go ahead.
So there was an update to that today that you may have missed, because I almost did. Somebody else in the replies was looking at satellite data and was not able to find that ship in the places where that ship supposedly was, according to the AIS data. So it sounds like there is a further mystery to be had there, and Marcus and this other person have started looking into the satellite data, and I will go find that tweet and put that in the nest, because this story is super interesting to me, and I hope the rest of you follow along to that.
Thanks for that update. I hadn't seen that, and I always do enjoy, good and sort of innovative work is always welcome, but when it leads to a bit of a mystery that you can contribute to, I always find that most engaging. Aaron, go ahead.
So I'm just looking at the sail of that submarine, and interesting. It does not look very like a large. It looks like either a small attack submarine or a special warfare submarine. But I'm looking through the class.
Aaron, are you referring to the post by H.I. Sutton?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the upshot from that was that the photo taken at a distance that some mistook for a submarine turned out to be an island with a lighthouse.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't know that part.
I like that you're immediately turning your analytical efforts to it.
Yeah, I was like looking at Russian sub that now, but because I could tell it didn't look like anything like a class of Russian sub that I've seen before. So I was like, oh, this is a weird looking sail.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe they'll be inspired and they'll use the lighthouse outline for their next class.
Yeah.
We'll find out.
It looks more like a German U-boat.
So continuing, just rolling along with interesting examples, resources. Fifth item back, post by Bellingcat. This is a tool that we highlighted in our last space. It is a tool put together by Bellingcat so that you can search OpenStreetMaps, right, which has some similar functionality to Google, but allows a little bit more API flexibility. And it's a piece of software called Overpass that does searching. And I won't recall the details of the example, but it was something like, find me a one-way street in New York City with a speed limit of 25 and a church and a pizzeria within 100 meters. And it will give you all the results that match all of those criteria, which is incredibly powerful. The only update from that item we talked about before is that now a team member of Bellingcat has prepared a walkthrough video. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you might like that easier introduction to the subject. Finally for this round, I do have a couple more in a moment. The sixth or so item back, it's a tweet by Ukraine Memes for NATO Teens, which we all know for its great comedic content, but it does some interesting posting as well. I just wanted to highlight this one because it's a thread of novel munitions used on drones, and it's not obvious that it has a ton of tactical. I think that it's a mix of tactically valuable information in terms of variants on munitions that are substantive in terms of either they're manufactured differently or they function a little bit better or they are easier to arm and load, to just sort of the raw ingenuity that's involved in some of these MacGyvering of munitions. The reason I am highlighting this one, beyond it's just the fact that it's generally interesting, is that this account actually grabbed a bunch of these photos from a larger thread that's put together by Abraxas SPA, which many of you will know as a good OSINT account. And I just wanted to highlight it because, sometimes we see people undertake these efforts in order to document things comprehensively. and you might not realize the value that develops just in having tons of examples until you're several months into it, and then you can say, okay, well, now I'm going to go through it and find all these interesting items, as they've done in this thread on munitions. So it's sort of an argument for, hey, look, if you are monitoring or building a long thread, as I know some of you are, on just all the updates on a particular subject, like Random had been covering the developments with the Chinese flight schools relying on foreign instructors. So efforts like that, they really do pay off in the long run, I think. So that's my encouragement to say, keep it up, guys. I'll run through a couple more interesting examples, then we'll move into the Ukrainian news. So interesting OSINT examples. They should all be loaded in the nest now. Going back to the first item, it's a bit of research that was done by Business Insider. A couple of other outlets were in on it as well. And they managed to get access to public copies of diagrams showing the tunnel complex beneath Putin's Black Sea Palace. Now, how this becomes specifically relevant, I don't know. But it's the sort of thing where if you're digging around for interesting details, you can find some really cool stuff. So I thought it was a good example to highlight. The next item is from the Conflict Intelligence team, who do good work. We discussed the follow-on from the May 9th Victory Day Parade last time, but they only put this out more recently. They actually have been doing counts of vehicles in multiple cities in Russia for several years. And so when we talked about it before, Sam Bendet had done sort of a quick survey, but only for this year. And I appreciated the fact that Conflict Intelligence team has been doing it for several years and therefore is able to graph the changes in vehicle numbers over the years. The third item back, so this is getting a little bit more into career info. Third item back is a tweet from Cheyenne, who is at the BBC. And I just thought it was interesting that we have talked about the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and Washington Post developing visual investigations teams. And now BBC has come out with its own team called BBC Verify, which is essentially using OSINT techniques in order to try to confirm stories that the BBC would be working on and potentially generate some unique details, which is cool that there are more opportunities opening up for people to do this professionally. Related on the professional front, fourth item back is a tweet by Sam Bendet. Sam was our guest last Sunday to chat about Russian crowdfunding efforts. And his organization, the Center for Naval Analysis, is hiring. And he actually reached out to me to ask if I would, promote this or retweet it. And so they're looking for a sort of an introductory researcher and an analyst. And I know that people who float around these spaces might be interested in that kind of work. Last item in recent examples is occasionally we've talked about archiving of content and accessibility of content on different social media platforms. We spoke about a week ago about Twitter's ongoing effort to archive and or delete accounts that have been inactive for quite a while, and the potential for loss of war crimes investigative material, videos, and so on as one potential consequence. This tweet, fifth item back, from Jack Margolin, he's noting that YouTube appears to have changed its policy again, and that now it's taking down video content from Wagner sources or promoting Wagner sources. And he suggests that it may hinder the work of investigators. Now, whether you think there is a trade-off between investigative potential versus the value of keeping sort of the propaganda off places like YouTube, that's an open discussion. But I just thought I would raise it as another data point in this sort of ongoing survey that we have. Brian, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, Michael, just a question, just like your opinion and maybe the other opinion of the other speakers here. So these major news outlets starting to hire for, I guess, OSINT-like sort of expertise and analysis. Do you get the sense it's that they're tired of being scooped by people like you? And I use that half jokingly, but do you get the sense that this trend is okay? This information is out there. We're not currently staffed to actually capture some of this information, yet, there are independent independent people out there that are really running circles around us in terms of getting this information. So we need to step up our game. Do you get that sense that that's the rationale behind this hiring activity?
I think that some of these organizations have put together teams that have been generating really original content. And so some of it is verification. I'll admit I don't have insight into their editorial processes, as in when might a print journalist who is reporting on matters, be required to reach out to the sort of visual investigations team to say, hey, can you supplement this by seeing if there's available video footage? Can you break it down? It seems like the early groups' efforts have been in really generating original content. So things like the New York Times doing the breakdown of footage of, the consequences of Russian violence in Bucha, or I think it was the Washington Post, may have just won or been a finalist for a Pulitzer for their visual investigations work on a shooting in Israel. So it seems like they're using it more as an enhancement, sort of a prestige service rather than simply a fact-checking. But who knows? Maybe they do both. It's just that I don't have insight into it. It's a great question, and if anybody happens to be deeper into the industry and would know, it would be really cool to find out. But I see we've been joined by at least a new speaker to me, Doc Bites. Did you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this. Thank you, John, for posting this space coming up, because it's something I hunger for, and I'm grateful that you guys are letting me participate in this. And it's a really fascinating discussion. I have a couple of very brief, succinct questions on a couple of different topics, and one for John has to do with the aircraft, but I can save that one for later to keep in time with your cadence that you're doing here. But I have to say,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, even though I'm a veteran, but I didn't. There's so many things of 445 days as a part of.
I'm sorry. I appear to have lost audio of Doc Bites. Am I the only one?
You are not.
No. Okay. So Doc Bites, I don't know if you can.
I'm getting connection issues like crazy, so I'll try and recycle and come back up later.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. That's just the way that live audio goes. It's no problem. And since you had questions about airplanes and so on, we definitely want to get to John's expertise. So we'll move into the Ukraine updates now, and we'll save some of the other background material. We do want to do some updates on Turkey and the Black Sea Grain Initiative.
You can't. You have to say Turkey.
Is that diggity?
You have to say Turkey.
Okay. So we will get into updates on Turkey and the Black Sea Grain Initiative in a little bit, but since we do have John is a guest. We'll get into Ukraine updates really shortly, but we'll go to random before we do that. Go ahead, random.
No, I was just waiting for us to get to John. You guys can go ahead. I was like, let's keep this show rolling here, Mr. Bond.
All right. No need to hold up. Okay. We'll do the topic of jets first, and then we'll move on to air defense and some missiles, where I know that John's expertise lies. And we'll kind of mix in between that updates on a couple of other subjects. I am just putting the items on aircraft up into the nest, so please bear with me a moment.
While you do that, I can give a quick air map update, because we're going to talk about air defense and all that.
Sure.
So current situation, guys, if you haven't been paying attention to the air defense situation or the past couple of days, is that the Russians have really changed up their strategy when it comes to hitting the Ukrainians, especially during their air defense activities, and also in the manner in which they've been using strikes and attacks. Obviously, we'll get into this with our friend Mr. Ridge here, but the notable additions and stuff like that were the we'll get into the whole thing with F-16s and everything like that, but we're talking like Shahed drones, calibers, and tonight we're also more Kinzhal strikes. Currently, the western half of Ukraine is still under its air alert. The whole country was under an air alert for the fourth straight night in a row. As of the last few days, there were multiple strikes in multiple regions. That said, there's also the incident that took place with the aircraft that were shot down over Belgorod that are related to this, which is that the air defense systems supplied by the West have been making a huge impact and a huge difference. Kinzhal missiles obviously lost their luster a little bit. This is one of those weapons the Russians like to hype up for themselves. Turns out that a PAC-3 is more than capable of handling it. We'll also get into how you cover air defense, and also how Western allies are trying to enhance that. That being said, I'm ready to turn it back over to Mr. Bond. Currently, there are explosions, though, reported in Lviv and in other areas of Ukraine. So obviously, they hit a little further west tonight than they did the night before. There were more notable Shaheds, and they're mixing up what missiles and what quantities they use over given days.
Okay, thanks, Random. I see there are hands up, but if you guys don't mind, I hope to get into the details on aircraft, and then that might give some context for your questions. So starting with the first item in the nest, this afternoon, Jimmy Rushton and Michael Weiss, who write for a couple of outlets, but often for Yahoo News, came out with this report where they said that they had gotten their hands on a U.S. assessment of 2 Ukrainian pilots who had been sent to do some training on F-16s, as I understand it, primarily on simulators, and not actually in aircraft themselves. And while the normal sort of training run for a pilot, I presume from being brand new into flying an F-16, I think it had been reported at something like 18 months. These pilots had some experience, and perhaps not knowing how well their experience in Soviet aircraft in the Ukrainian Air Force would translate, they wanted to see how quickly they could run through training cycles. And apparently this assessment concluded that it's likely, Ukrainian pilots with similar experience could run through training within 4 months, which is great news. There was no detail about whether that's been moved forward past that assessment point, like as in whether the U.S. has actually undertaken to begin training Ukrainian pilots. I haven't seen a denial of that, nor confirmation. So, I mean, that's great news, but it is what it is in terms of being an assessment, and we'll have to wait for, evidence of further development. I will note that as early as last summer, there were media reports that Ukraine was sending some of its pilots to the US to private training centers that had simulators in an effort to get them ahead of the curve. And it would be interesting, I didn't see any details in these stories, but it would be interesting to find out whether either of the two gentlemen who were assessed, for purposes of this story, were involved in that earlier effort on simulators beginning a few months ago. But John, I see you have your hand up, and then we'll go around.
Right. So just briefly regarding the simulators. So per my discussions with, this is a little bit dated. This is probably as maybe 6-7 months ago. Per my discussions with a contact at one of those companies, it didn't seem like that was occurring at the time, as of about 6-7 months ago. The other thing to note is that those simulators are export controlled, so I'm not sure what implication that would have in terms of foreign nationals coming to the United States to use them. I'd need to have a look at what the specific, export controls on that, if there's anything restricting use by foreign citizens, even inside the United States. That could, if such restrictions exist, that could prevent that from going forward without some sort of either formal or at the very least tacit U.S. government approval.
I appreciate that detail about foreigners, even on U.S. soil, and their access to the tech. But as we'll see, it looks like there are a variety of training approaches that are being developed. Before getting to that, the Doc Bites, you had connection issues a moment ago. Now that we're sort of on the planes topic, did you want to come in with your question?
Thank you very much. John, Ukraine's going to win this war, and eventually, as they continue to modernize their military, the F-16, when they're ready to start purchasing planes, is not the one they would start buying, right? It may be available and it may be cheaper than some of the other ones out there, but that's not what they would choose to do if this drags on until after the war is over. Am I right on that?
What exactly? I'm not quite sure I follow. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, everyone's making a big argument for F-16s, and there's this many, and they can do this. But with Ukraine's topography, the airfields that they have available to them, the eventuality of them becoming a part of NATO, all of those things indicate to me that that's not the platform that they would want to build upon, because it's an older aircraft, even with the upgrades and updates that are available to them. We're talking about F-16s because they can fire different weapons. They have active radar capabilities that current MiGs and SUs don't have, or the SUs they have do not possess. So does this become moot in a year? For the whole F-16 argument, if they're not put in there now?
I mean, depending on what level of success they enjoy on the ground with the coming offensive and subsequent operations, obviously in the ideal case, that could potentially render, this whole discussion moot. That said, well, it won't totally render it moot, because it may decrease the need for fixed wing assets from existential to just extremely urgent. The simple fact is that the legacy Soviet airframes that they're operating, the Su-24Ms, the Su-25s, the Su-27s, the MiG-29s, all of those are at the end of their lives. Flight hour-wise, Ukraine does not really have sufficient refurb, maintenance, and repair capacity to keep them running for very much longer, especially considering most of those major facilities have either been occupied or otherwise subjected to Russian strikes. They physically just don't have enough spare parts to keep them running for, indefinitely, probably not even to the medium term. Neither do the Poles. They've provided most of their inventory of spare parts, as far as I'm aware. The Slovaks have provided everything they have. Bulgaria has, I'm not sure if we've seen any action from Bulgaria on that front, but there is a finite lifespan left on those aircraft, and there becomes a point where it's just not economical to continue pushing that further. F-16s, they will be the choice for Ukraine simply because cost is by far and above the biggest constraint long term, especially in a peacetime setting for the Ukrainian armed forces. Keep in mind their defense budget annually pre-invasion was only $6 billion for their entire armed forces and Ministry of Defense. So they have a very limited amount of funds to work with. So the cheapest option, which is the F-16, is almost certainly going to be the one they go with.
Interestingly, Michael Kaufman came out about a week ago on the idea of how the F-16 is being pitched, like how pressure is being put on countries to make it available. And he suggested that a lot of the conversation early on has been about, oh, well, it would enable this new munition, or it has better performance, it has better radar, it would be an improvement over what Ukraine has now. And he was saying that in his mind, the more convincing argument, and maybe to decision makers, is actually, instead of saying, look how much more they could have, is to say, what they have now is attriting. They will run out. If they run out, that is a major problem. Therefore, it should be a sort of pitch from the idea of, well, what if it's they're lost, as opposed to, oh, we'd love to be more helpful. Which I thought was an interesting take. And so I'll highlight before I go to hands, I know we have a bunch, that the second item in the nest is some background from Politico just today on the background of the pressure on the United States to consider F-16s itself. But we'll go back to John and then we'll go around. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just on that point, that's one of the more, at least to me personally, I find that that's been one of the more unfortunate aspects of the broader fixed wing discussion, is that Kaufman, he is correct there. That should have been the focus of this conversation since day one. Most of the Ukrainian analysts and various Ukrainian aviation sources that I follow have unanimously been, highlighting this as the primary issue since day one. So I think it's very, very unfortunate that that they have that's fallen on deaf ears, their pleas on this specific point for the better part of 12 months now. The two primary aspects that we have to focus on are really sustainment, and in terms of actual employment of these aircraft, it's going to be overwhelmingly defensive counter air. So denying the VKS, Russian aerospace forces, the ability to operate beyond Ukraine's forward line of troops and within the Ukrainian rear, as well as providing air-based air defense against Shaheds, UAVs, and Russian cruise missiles. That is the overwhelming majority of the missions that the PS ZSU is flying right now, and that is what they will continue to fly in Western airframes. That's not going to change. So while all of those additional performance capabilities and new munitions integrations that an F-16 or any other Western fixed-wing asset bring to the table are certainly very nice to have, they're really just that. They're just nice to have. They're the cherry on top. The Western fixed-wing is not about giving them a new capability in and of itself. It's about sustaining the status quo and preventing it from deteriorating any further than it already has. And the nice thing about it is it does give us that path to evolve towards these new, capabilities and these new mission sets and these new uses.
And it does seem as if that message is getting through a little bit. So looking at the third item in the nest from The Guardian is the fact that the United Kingdom came out just the other day, along with the Netherlands, and said they were working to build an international coalition to assist in the provision of F-16 jets. However, none of these countries have come out directly and said that they would actually provide them. And in a few moments, we can get into what countries have offered training and what countries have sort of said, we'll train, but we can't actually help with jets at this time. But we will go through hands first. I think the order was Whiskey and then Aaron, and then we'll see. Go ahead, Whiskey.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. I read that article that came out today too, discussing the two Ukrainian pilots that went through the simulators, and from what I gathered, if it was accurate and correct, I did not get a hint that they may have possibly used simulators before. I think one of the one of the first things they had to go up against was the event of a flameout. And I think it was on the first day. They didn't do well with it, but by the second day, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they were on top of it and just kept moving forward in that. Secondly, it does make a lot of sense. A lot of us have always said it makes a lot of sense giving Ukraine the F-16s. I know there's been a lot of pushback on it from certain outgoing people here in the U.S. In the military, but at the same time, I was thinking about it today, and it's like as more of this NATO gear goes into Ukraine, which I love to see, by the way. There's certain integration and communication capabilities that are able to integrate much easier than trying to integrate those into some of the used Soviet era equipment that's also being used in Ukraine. And so it just expands capabilities. And to me, not just like John said, like supporting, some of these MiG 29 airframes, and I think it's the Su-27. Sorry, I'm not a fixed wing guy. But yeah, there is a finite availability of parts to keep maintaining those airframes, to keep them in the sky. So it makes a hell of a lot of sense to start getting them over to airframes that actually can be supported and also integrated. And yes, the cherry on the top is the expanded capabilities that those airframes bring to Ukraine. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for giving me time.
It does. Thanks for joining us, Whiskey. Aaron, go ahead.
So Ukraine has had the capability and has had the infrastructure to manufacture parts for their aircraft for a certain amount of time, but it is not substantial. They're using these jets a lot more than they ever used to, right? I mean, this was during peacetime, they had enough then. Now it's the airframes are really going through their lifespans like crazy. And I can see that. The F-16s, I mean, it's not just not just the United States trained them. The United States is great, but then now we've got, like what we're going to talk about, it's UK, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and Poland even. So this is great. This is going to be able to allow for getting a lot more pilots ready and trained, and having that capability put forth for the Ukrainian Air Force in the coming months. They need it. And the thing is this should have been really rushed. This should have been really stepped up the first couple months of the war. I mean, we didn't hear a lot about it. We heard rumors and whatnot. We're finally seeing the first two pilots in the product line of the training coming forward at some point. But what happens, I'm worried we're seeing Russia do more sort of a suppression of enemy air defense said missions, not as capable as the West, but we're seeing them over the last month going after air defense more and and we're definitely seeing that within the last 2 weeks, or definitely a week and a half with the Patriots in Kyiv.
And that's a great point. And so after we finish running through the topics on aircraft, we'll move on to air defense. So yeah, maybe if you just save that point, then you can bring it back in when we get there.
Oh, sure. And
okay.
Just to finish up my points there, I mean, Russia it's using hypersonic missiles. Of course, it's running out. And then again, I worry, talking about airframes, I worry the Russians are really going to start trying to ramp up hits against Ukrainian airfields in Western Ukraine, because now they've got the Storm Shadows. They're going to be. It looks like right now that the VKS is creating a special task force to go after the Storm Shadow and the aircraft that are capable of carrying them. And so we could see major attempts at strikes in Western Ukraine on the Ukrainian Air Forces airfields that are in protected areas, all the way to Lviv and in those areas. So I worry about that as well. We need to keep an eye.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about the VKS putting together any groups for that purpose. So if you have, any tweets on that, that would be great. If you could send them along or add them to the nest, I'd love to see details.
Yeah, and all I know is it's a new task force created for something like this, and it looks like it's just kind of similar to what they were trying to do with HIMARS, but it failed. But there's more going to come out of it. I'll try to find it.
Okay. I didn't see the order, but I'm going to go to Jane first.
Sorry. Thank you very much. The only thing I was going to say here is part of, I think it's the issue of F-16s has been a sort of a double-edged sword. And I know in the United States, acquisition can turn into, or not acquisition, but sales of aircraft almost turns into this weird sales mindset. When I think that you made the point of their airframes are attriting at such a high rate of speed that they're not going to have anything to fly unless we get them some new aircraft. And I think that that's been one problem they've come up against. And of course, the other one is, do we want to put U.S. airframes in a fight directly against Russia? And that is a problem that I think we're going to run into, albeit we're getting to a point that may become less significant. Not sure. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, particularly with some of the changes that are going on in the Joint Chiefs with the new chairman coming in the United States. So
that's a great point. There was also that changeover in that I believe the gentleman's name, he was the chief of policy or head of policy at the Department of Defense, Colin Cole, I think, who is it's just been announced that he's leaving. And we'll get to that when we come to the missile portion. But some people have suggested that to the extent he may have been among those reluctant to provide more aid, there may be more scope to provide that. Just before, so thanks for your comments, Jane. Just before going to the other hands, I'll mention a few more of the items in the nest for more context, so I can queue up a few more things as well. So if you start with the fourth item back, several countries have announced in the last few days that they either will be or they are investigating the potential to train Ukrainian pilots. Probably the clearest commitment was made by the United Kingdom. So that fourth item back is a tweet by the Prime Minister's office saying that they will open a UK-based flying school. However, if you go to the next item, the tweet from Tim Robinson, and Tim is the editor-in-chief of Aerospace Magazine, which is the magazine of the Royal Aeronautical Society. So I think has good insight into it, in the United Kingdom particularly. And he drew out the detail where they say they will commence an elementary flying phase for Ukrainian pilots to learn basic training. And so he goes into what particular training craft they may use for that quote, elementary flying phase. And that it really is more like introductory training as opposed to meshing up with this report from the United States of F-16 training specifically. So it seems like there is a mixed bag. However, moving on to the next item, which is just coverage from the Kiev Independent, where they're quoting Wallace, Ben Wallace, who's the Secretary of Defense in the UK, who had come out and said that while the UK will definitely assist nations that wish to provide Ukraine with fighter jets, the United Kingdom's own role will be limited, which I think is meant, it's sort of coded language for we might not be able to provide them any of our own jets. And you'll see that after I go through a few more hands, I'll bring up examples from several other countries, but that seems to be the consistent theme of we want to help, we'll organize a coalition, we'll do some training, but nobody has said we will give you planes yet. Well, I'll go to Exit as co-host, and then I'll go to Random. Go ahead, Exit.
Just taking a quick moment to do a little housekeeping. If you like what you're hearing, you can go to the bottom right-hand corner. There's that purple button, and you can retweet the space and invite some other people in to come chat with us. And also, you will notice that we are taking sources down from the nest, and you will be able to find them underneath that same tweet. So if you're looking for anything that we've talked about and you can't find it right away, look underneath that tweet and you'll find the sources there.
Thanks for the reminder. I often forget that. Random, go ahead.
So a few things about the F-16 situation, and in regards to what we're talking about with Ukrainian airframes. I don't know if anybody could hear the heavy sigh. That was my dog. The thing is, with what we're currently situated with the Storm Shadow capabilities, there's only 2 aircraft currently capable of carrying a Storm Shadow or a Scalp missile, and they are both Sukhois. Now, if they had somehow managed to jury rig a MiG-29's belly to carry one of those suckers, that's impressive. But the fact of the matter is, it's either the Su-27 flanker or the Su-24 fencer, and the fencer is going to be asked to do a lot of heavy lifting for an aircraft that they have literally had to cannibalize from the older airframes and aircraft that they can manage to scrounge and get their hands on in the country itself, because the Su-24 was not exported to other Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War. However, they were later exported to Syria and Algeria, or Sudan and Algeria, and a couple other countries, but they're very hard to get parts for already. And they're intensely maintenance heavy, and I think they only had like 4 operational when I last checked. Now, when it comes to the situation with the F-16s, John mentioned it. Part of the reason why fighters are so important is because they offset the demands that are going to be placed on air defense, which is you have a platform capable of carrying a beyond visual range, or BVR, air-to-air missile. And so far, the F-16s that are available, quote unquote, that have been either that are lined up or looked at are Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, possibly Poland. But the top 3 are Belgium, Norway, and the Netherlands. All of those F-16s are old, but they all went through a modernization program back in the 90s. All of it was kind of hodgepodge because of various reasons. But basically, they were made later to carry later model missiles. Now, they're not going to be the most up-to-date versions of the AMRAAM missile, but it's good enough in some respects. Dmitry Alperovich at the Silverado Institute will outline this. The earlier model AMRAAMs don't have the same greater sense of range, but it's enough to get coordinated with air defense that it will make a definite impact on what Russia's trying to do over the Ukrainian airspace for the last few months. The other issue is with the fact that the UK is offering up this fighter school training is they do have Western trainer aircraft like the Hawk. The other thing is they also have a NATO flight school kind of thing. So a general NATO-based flight school that is based out of England. I forget the town, but I have to thank Andrew Perpetua and Exit for their space for reminding me of it the other night. So the other thing, so there's going to be, I don't know for older pilots, obviously with the news that if the U.S. were to take the experienced pilots of Ukraine, they'd be churned out way faster. If it comes to new pilots and getting up to NATO standardization, that's probably going to be easier, but they still need the simulators and they still need the models, because the F-16AM, which is the modernized version of an F-16A, is going to have a lot of miles on it, like the MiG-29s that they just got. So there's a lot playing into this. If the French actually do go ahead, because there's like the on and off comments that, oh yeah, we've been having Ukrainians look at Mirages. Now, if the Ukrainian Air Force suddenly winds up with a bunch of Mirage 2000Ds, that would be super helpful, but that is the same question. When in regards to like airframes in general, it is that cost-benefit analysis where these are not cheap things. These are expensive platforms, and if the Europeans are going to go through with this, they better have a supply chain set up and have more than just U.S. backing to go, okay, give them the airframe. because there's going to be a lot that plays into that. That being said, it seems like there is a sea change going on within the U.S. itself with Colin leaving, because reportedly, also in political, he is one of the big proponents against sending fighter aircraft into Ukraine. So that is definitely going to be something. But I made John flail his hand up, so I'm going to let him go.
John.
Yeah, just one brief thing about training, doing conversion training for existing pilots versus total versus the complete set of training for totally fresh new Ukrainian pilots. As far as I'm aware, it seemed a little bit unclear from the UK's announcement which they were actually offering. The Sunak's phrasing about a couple statements seemed to suggest completely new pilots, but on the other hand, nobody has discussed training totally new Ukrainian pilots on airframes because, quite frankly, the timeline makes it a zero immediate benefit. Well, zero short-term or medium-term benefit. We'd be talking probably a minimum training times at least 2 years. So if that's going to be our primary option, either the war will be over or the Ukrainian Air Force will have run out of Soviet airframes well before then. So I would imagine it almost certainly has to be conversion training for existing pilots.
Which you'd think would make sense, but a skeptical person, and very few would call me skeptical, but a skeptical person would say that some countries may have been providing what they have as opposed to what Ukraine needs. And I've seen some people talk about training capacity in the UK system, and that this training may bump the training of UK pilots themselves. And so it could be that it is starting at a fairly basic level, so as not to interfere with their own processes. But I certainly hope that's not the case. John, do you want to come back in on that?
So even if it's at a basic level, that can still be very useful as part of an overall conversion training program for existing pilots. One of the things that was identified in the U.S. assessment of the 2 Ukrainian pilots was they were a little bit uncomfortable with Western avionics and the English language avionics, all that stuff, the whole glass cockpit, among a number of other related items. One of the things that the UK training program could potentially do to help synergize with other training efforts is, while this wouldn't speed up the overall timeline, if the U.S. continues to drag its feet, which it probably will until probably close to the last possible minute, as it has a tendency to do, this would be an
Churchill quote, John. Got to remember the Churchill quote.
Yep. This would be a very good opportunity for the UK to basically do familiarization training with Ukrainian pilots for, glass cockpits, modern digital avionics, Western tactics, Western, communications standards, electronic warfare, all of those things which are not necessarily airframe specific, but which they may not be particularly comfortable with currently just because of their background flying, older, Soviet airframes. And that would allow them to hit the ground running when they actually get to airframe specific training for F-16s or potentially some other airframe, but probably F-16s. The other thing I should mention is that training capacity is a very, very significant deal. There is no scenario here where Ukrainian pilots get trained without bumping other pilots from the training queue. That scenario is not physically possible. The UK, if they want to train Ukrainian pilots, they're almost certainly going to have to push some of their own pilots' training schedules back. If any other European country wants to train them on F-16s, they're going to have to push their own pilots' training schedules back. If the U.S. wants to train Ukrainian pilots, same thing is true there as well. But we have to look at the overall capacity in those cases. I spoke to a U.S. Air Force contact about this morning in explicit detail, and what he commented was that collectively, his estimate was that Europe can collectively train 4 to 6 Ukrainian pilots on F-16s, mainly on simulators, every 6 months, which is a grossly insufficient number. So there doesn't seem to be a way for this to be workable without U.S. involvement, because we're the only ones that have the physical training infrastructure to do so. His estimate was that if we're willing to bump some U.S. pilots' training schedules back a bit, we could probably achieve a throughput of 30 to 40 Ukrainian pilots every 6 months through Luke Air Force Base.
I heard the same thing, that we could definitely train about like 30 pilots at US, but we'd have to bump our own pilots for sure in order to get that done.
Lots of interesting details in there. Just for the audience, the quote that Random is referring to, I think it was Churchill, who said that, to paraphrase it, the United States can be counted on to do what's right, but usually only after having exhausted all the other options. I'll just point out that even to the extent we're questioning U.S. capacity and UK capacity, looking up in the nest, people hear the headline and they say, oh, great, there's going to be training in France and the UK. Well, the UK has more explicitly committed to it and given details, but France, it was based on Macron saying that the door is open to training pilots, but that I haven't seen details flow in connection with that. And so I don't know that it's as far along as the UK plan. And that apparently Macron was then asked in a TV interview afterward whether NATO would soon begin sending planes to Ukraine, and he refused to respond to that question. So that's probably a no. That similarly, Belgium has said it's willing to train Ukrainian pilots. This is the third item up in the nest, but that again, they don't think they can provide their own aircraft. So we have a couple of hands up. I think Jacoby had a very specific question as follow-up, and then we'll go to Whiskey, who's been very patient. Go ahead, Jacoby.
Thanks, Michael. I don't want to interrupt the flow at all, but I only to ask John if you could share with the space just a little bit of your background. And one of the reasons, or one of the many reasons we asked you to be a co-host is, because of your background in aeronautics, and maybe you could share a little bit about that. And then, pardon me if you go back to Hans.
Oh, sure. So, full disclosure, I am a student studying physics and munitions, military technology, general defense, and national security policy. That's kind of, I guess, my passion or my hobby. So I do this mainly in my free time. Hoping to eventually, go work in the defense contractor, DoD, or something to that effect, 3-letter agency, something along those lines. My Twitter feed is mostly analysis concerning munitions, aviation-related topics, just general defense matters, and as well as some space technology and some related subjects.
That's a great thought just to cover background. So thanks for that, John. We appreciate you being willing to join us today. Whiskey's been waiting a while. Please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Bond. I'll try and make it really quick. 3 points. The original comment I came up and made, it was actually Colin that I was referring to, was the big, opponent to sending Ukraine the F-16. So I appreciate that actually being brought up, because couldn't remember it at the time. Secondly, oh God, I'm drifting again. Sorry. Secondly, is there any, we're talking about current pilots that are flying Soviet airframes, but has there been any consideration for other pilots, let's say not like maybe military, but let's say civilian pilots to be brought into the fold of actually trying to train on that? I don't know if that makes sense or not. And my third point is, I saw for the first time today, and I haven't seen this before, was I think it was like Ukraine air alerts or so was saying that there was a MiG-31 that was being tracked that does have the ability to launch those Kinzhal missiles. And if I'm giving false information based off of what I saw, please correct me, because I don't want to put anything bad out there. But is that actually a thing? And thank you for your time.
We'll go to John, and then I saw Random's hand shoot up. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so the primary launch platform, well, the only launch platform for the Kinjal is the MiG-31K. It's just a modification of the MiG-31. They removed all of the usual pylons and hardpoints and replaced them with a single underbelly hardpoint to mount the Kinjal, and I believe they have about a dozen of them or so in service. The various Ukrainian Telegram channels that monitor the overall air picture and the status of air raid alerts, I'm not exactly sure what their source is for this. If it gets posted by, I guess, maybe the regional governors would be my initial guess. They will sometimes post like specifics of, and like, for example, a MiG-31K launch has been, or sortie has been detected, Kinjal launch is possible. They'll sometimes have details like that. I haven't seen any specific information, at least for the major monitoring channels, that's incorrect. Again, I'm not 100% sure where they're sourcing it from. My guess is like the regional governor Telegram channels, but I've yet to actually go and personally verify that.
Random, you had, I think, put your hand up in response.
Yeah, so the MiG-31K is definitely the only launch platform for the Kinzhal or the Killjoy missile, which is the NATO code name for it. The other thing is what they do is they're mainly stationed in Belarus, and they're using this airfield in Belarus to train new MiG-31 pilots in order to launch more Kinzhals. So what happens is usually you'll see, if they go through training rounds, you usually see a liftoff of a MiG-31, like a couple of them, one or two, that go up without missiles. An example being last night, there were MiG-31s in the air, but they didn't launch any Kinzhals. And then the next night, which was tonight, they did launch some. The way that the alert system works is there is, like, an addition to one of the live maps that is constantly broadcasted and receives reports from either the governors or from people who call in. I'm not sure if they call in where or anything, but they when it gets reported, it immediately gets added to the map. The actual aircraft themselves are probably from radars and trackers that give that information to the regional governors. Usually the most obvious way to detect what's going on with launches or with bombers outside the MiG-31 is through either the BareNet or people who follow what's going on at the various airfields, which is Olenia has become the big one up in Murmansk. And you also have Angles over in Saratov, over by the Caspian Sea, and then the other regions by Rostov. So that's kind of the major ones that they follow with that. But it's like if certain air defenses and the radars have become a lot better because of all the influxes of the new systems, that they can detect a lot faster. But when it comes to like the Kinzhals themselves, I'm just gonna go off on a little mini rant, which is to say we need to stop calling it a hypersonic missile. It's because if it's a hypersonic missile, literally every single missile ever made is a hypersonic missile, including the V2 rocket by the Germans. The thing is just one of those weapon systems that is shiny and impressive looking until it actually gets used in combat and faced with an actual challenge. And with that, I'll hand it off.
Sure. We'll go back to John as co-host, and then we'll find our way around.
Thank you. I totally forgot what I put my hand up for. There's a specific thing I wanted to respond to about. Oh yeah, I remember now. Sorry. The MiG-31Ks. So I'd be hesitant to call them training flights per se. That might be their purpose in part, but one of the things that the Russians have been observed to do is they will sortie those MiG-31Ks alongside the A-50U mainstay airborne early warning control aircraft, presumably with the intent to use to have the MiG-31Ks with the possibility of a Kinzhal launch to provoke Ukrainian air defense radars into emitting and then detecting those emissions and trying to locate those radars with the A-50. So there may be a training element to it, but I suspect their primary purpose is reconnaissance of Ukraine's integrated air defense network.
So the two primary purposes, like you said, are like, it's not just training, it's also trying to spoof their radars. So what John's talking about is like commonly referred to as spoofing. So it's like you fool the system into either activating or being diverted by decoys and stuff like that.
Okay, we'll go through hands, just so you guys can laugh at me a little bit. We're still on point 1 of like 10, and we're halfway through. So either we're going to get through 25%, or we're going to run the space for 12 hours. I'm sure some of you would like the 12 hours. I suspect Exit might not. So we'll see how it goes. I saw Aaron waving. So Aaron, if you could go fairly prompt briefly,
Yep.
and then I think we'll go to Gurney after that. Go ahead, Aaron.
So the Russians have been attempting to test, while they were planning on testing the Tu-22M3M, which was supposedly going to carry 4 Kinzels, but they haven't even got a working one yet. So luckily, and that's a good thing, because 4 of them, and then you have 2 of them that would make 8. So yes, I mean that was an experimental version, and they haven't produced any numbers of them, at least not yet. So, and that would be, yeah. But again, the Kinzel is an aero ballistic missile. It's before it impacts, it actually slows down and and navigates turns, has a twist and turn to move into location on terminal phase to its target. It's basically an Iskandar M that's air launched. It's basically a similar cousin, very much. As I mean, they were lucky even to get the MiG-31 is a good it's a big aircraft, big fighter. But I mean, you have to take every other. There's no way without modifying the aircraft that you'd be able to carry that thing. That thing is massive. I mean, to carry on an aircraft.
Gurney, would you like to go ahead? Yeah, Gurney, please go ahead.
Hey, so I'll take the 25% throughput. No, just joking here. John, I got 2 points here. The first one's a question for you, and well, they're both questions, but the first one is a short question. Do we have any knowledge whether Ukraine has disclosed if there's been any continuity of basic flight training? I just asked that. We've seen them do air assault jumps in the middle of a war for training. Is there an analog? Should we expect them to have continuity with basic, not advanced, but basic?
So I spoke to a Ukrainian friend who follows this extremely closely, Ukrainian Air Force, about a week or so ago about this. What he told me was that so Ukraine has a 5-year fighter pilot training program, normally based out of Kharkiv. They have a school there. He isn't exactly sure what happened to the class that was supposed to graduate in 2022, if they finished their training or if they were put, just directly into it. He said that looks like they're still attempting to continue to recruit new people for their fighter training program despite the invasion. So I don't know exactly what the status of the program is, but they were definitely recruiting for trying to find people for the upcoming classes of the coming years. So that still is progressing to some extent.
So that segues into my second question here, sort of statement question, just about capacity. I would like to see that Ukraine is doing some sort of basic continuity. It seems like there's enough turboprop trainers out there in the world that they could probably get their hands on some out of country to at least continue that, for future planning. But I wanted to drill down real quick here on the capacity. When you were speaking about whether it's Europe or the United States for whether it's F-16 or different advanced training simulators and or actual aircraft, I just want to bring up, so you can go back to World War II. It's not an analog here, right? Link Aviation, Link Trainers. I want to bring this up sort of to say where there's a will, there's a way. So I want to push and say, I understand the simulators are export controlled, especially because it's going to have, realistic physical dynamics, physics, and everything else of the cockpit simulated. But I want to actually drill down and say, minus the export controls, the world of F1 racing, judging reaction times has gotten pretty good so long as the physics simulation is there. And we know that that software exists. And yes, it exists for certain hardware platforms, but take it out of the industry for a second, industry agnostic of the current producer. I feel that that's the current bottleneck. But I want to say here, barring the current bottleneck and knowing that there's a dire need for this, it seems that the physics could be replicated on a bare bones setup so long as the software and information, essentially the information contained within it, not ported one-to-one, but sort of a remap to something bare bones. I just want to challenge that to say, I think if Europe and the United States wanted to make more simulators available, it would not be an expensive proposition in terms of getting Ukrainians familiarized with the glass cockpits, judging their reaction times. Sure, it might not be, a 5-axis simulator, but it could be something like a 3-screen wraparound display, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think the feasibility is on that? And again, I take industry timelines out of it for their existing contracts. And I just say, what can really be done if somebody puts the pedal to the metal here in terms of making the physical, the glass environment, and the physics reality ported over to something bare bones that can be placed in the hands of Ukrainian pilots who have gone through some sort of basic turboprop training and some sort of basic course where they've been vetted out for psychological and physical reasons, and that they can get familiarization in the cockpits, and then at that point get jet time, and jet time being the significant bottleneck. What do you think about that?
So I imagine that's probably possible to some extent. What I don't know, what I have to, probably a couple of people I can ask about this. What would be, I guess my first thought would be, what would be the minimum physical requirements for a F-16 simulator to produce a meaningful training experience for these Ukrainian pilots? I guess that'd be my first thought, is what are those minimum physical parameters of the physical simulator unit itself that are required in order to give that necessary training knowledge. In terms of the software part, if there's a political will and there's a willingness to grant waivers to these various export controls, I don't see a reason why it's not possible to spin that off into another physical platform. But again, that kind of comes back to the question is, what is the minimum physical requirements needed for it to, produce a useful training experience on the necessary items or the necessary skill sets?
Thanks, John. And I'm just going to make a statement here at the end. So in the world of F1 simulation, 20, 15 years ago, people were like, what do these gamers think they're doing? They can't really actually go from these organized leagues to be actual race car drivers. And funny enough, it actually proved, even though there weren't 5-axis simulators and they weren't all that great, so long as the physics engine was comparable to the actual performance, and so long as the familiarization, the controls, the cockpit, so not something like a very expensive 5-axis, producing some sort of forces, it was actually fairly good at predicting and judging reaction times, which seemed to be incredibly important to both F1, Formula One racers and jet pilots, right? It can't weed out the physical characteristics. Can they survive X number of Gs? Do they have a psychological profile? But I would say it's a start, and I don't think the familiarization for the software really requires much physical, because I go back to the Link trainer, for World War II. If anyone knows their aviation history, those blue boxes were powered by organ bellows, right? It was just like a 3-axis simulator, but it was enough at the time to familiarize many Allied pilots before they got into the cockpit. And that was also, an era where training was cut short due to the circumstances. So I would challenge people out there to say, I don't think capacity to train should be the bottleneck. It might be a bottleneck now, but I don't think we should accept that. Thanks, guys.
Michael, real quick, because it's on this topic ahead of Whiskey and Whiskey's friend. Real quick.
Sure, you can go ahead. Then we'll go to whiskey. But if just so we can get past the first topic, if you guys can keep it to like 30 seconds, if at all possible, I would really appreciate that. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I apologize to everybody, but thank you. It's relevant. I was talking to John in DMs about simulators, and I think this is an important point. John, maybe you can share that. Simulators are specific to airframes, right? And there's just a limited number of F-16 simulators that are available versus F-22, F-18, or whatever else is out there. Thank you again. Sorry.
As far as I'm aware, yes. I'm not sure what limit amongst like specific, purpose-produced simulators for fighter aircraft. I don't know to what extent they're, for example, physically reconfigurable to represent different, military airframes. But generally, my understanding is that they're usually fairly specific.
So that's another factor, right?
Yeah, but that gets into, without taking up too much additional time, that gets into what Gurney and I were previously discussing. That is, you could probably port the software to another platform. The question is, is that platform physically representative enough to provide that, that necessary training experience in whatever specific areas you are looking to train them in.
Okay. Whiskey, you were waving a moment ago. Go ahead.
And thank you, Michael. I will make this really quick because I want you to also move on to the next topics. But just a basic rundown. I'm a FPV pilot. I've spent quite a bit of my time actually trying to share like the FPV knowledge I have with certain folks in Ukraine. And this topic gets brought up quite a bit. I know it's not the same as, fixed wing F-16 flight simulators, but it actually is. It is relatively still on point, and that it comes down to actually the physics. So, a lot of stuff like when you're trying to train a new pilot, if you're using a simulator, does the physics of the simulator actually match the real world experience? And a lot of times the case is no, it does not. So what I've actually done is try to provide, much less expensive real world drones to new pilots that actually want to get a taste of what it's like to actually fly. But it doesn't, like if you crash it or whatever, it doesn't cost as much. There's obviously in FPV, there's no risk to the pilot, but it costs much less than flying, true, like let's say 7-inch or so FPV drone. You're flying something much smaller, something that can actually be done in a much safer environment, let's say indoors in, a gym or so. But it comes back, the main point I'm trying to make is, as far as simulators go, you can get to it, you can get close, whether it's FPV or whether it's real world fixed wing. You can get close to the same physics, but it's not the same as having real world stick time, which is why I always push real world stick time and actually try and provide, scalable, equipment or devices or such that can actually do that. And which brings back to the point I brought up earlier about the civilian pilots. And has there been any discussion of actually bringing any of them up, because they have actual real world stick time, although going from, let's say, a turboprop or internal combustion prop to a jet is going to be a much bigger jump. You still have the basic understanding of what it takes to actually fly an airplane, and at the same time, and where the trade-off goes between FPV and some of these glass canopy, modern era fighters, is you have a lot of information coming at you very quickly in a heads-up display that you have to pay attention to. And you're not only flying it, but you're actually intaking all of that information coming at you, and how do you deal with that, and how do you prioritize that? Anyway, thank you, Mr. Bond. I will shut up and drop back down.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I don't know what the recruiting pipeline for the Ukrainian Air Force is like, whether they prioritize civilian pilots or not. If anybody happens to know, let us know, whether by DM or come up and just let us know quickly. I just haven't seen it covered very much. Jane, go ahead, and then we'll move on to some air defense topics.
Sure. This is just quick. I ran through Colin Cowell's most recent testimony on F-16s. And his story, and I will just leave it as his story to the committee he spoke with, is it would take the United States 18 months to get the Ukrainians F-16, and by happenstance, 18 months to train their guys. I find that to be a little bit a little bit of a stretch, like a large one, but he's been the biggest roadblock to getting those aircraft. The one hitch in the works here is it appears as though Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, may be leaving. That is just strictly something I heard from a friend in the administration this evening. And while he was scheduled to go back to Stanford, if that job opens up, he may take it, which really complicates things. That's it.
Well, Sullivan's also dealing with the fact that, I'm sorry, Mr. Bond, but Sullivan's also dealing with the fact that the Secret Service is investigating a break-in at his house. So that's,
yeah, that wasn't his bad. That
I know, but that could put pressure on anybody in that kind of a job.
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one if it's sort of word of mouth at this point. But just as a final wrapper on the plane issue, the scorecard is that the UK will be providing training. France and Belgium have suggested that they're open to it. But the UK said its ability to provide aircraft is limited. Macron of France refused to answer the question. Belgium said they can't provide aircraft, and Poland came out and volunteered and said they can't provide aircraft either. So at this point, we have one for sure training program. We have the US investigating training, and we have the UK trying to partner with the Netherlands to promote a coalition, but nobody actually wants to provide aircraft. So we're kind of stuck. Some people have noted the comparison to the Leopard coalition building efforts early on. Okay, go ahead, Gurney.
Yeah, sorry. I'll make this very brief, Michael. I know you want to move on. So some would say this is, like you just said, very similar to the Leopard. I don't know this to be true, but perhaps with policy, this is boiling the frog. I saw that used today. It's a pretty old term, but perhaps what this is a bunch of machinations to sort of put it out into the public sphere for that, and that there's possibly a plan in place. Hopefully that's there, but I say this with a caveat. I don't think we should take our foot off the gas pedal in terms of asking for it yesterday, asking for it today, or to accept that that's occurring. But if they are boiling the frog in terms of foreign policy by putting this out there, by the time it actually happens, it's not even an escalatory thing because it's been out there, it's gone in circles, and then basically that has proved and tested the foreign policy. Thanks.
Okay, so just as an overview, we have maybe an hour 15, hour 20 left. My hope is that we can run through some air defense topics. We may have some among us who can provide some updates on the front line. I am hoping to do some quick updates on Turkey and the Black Sea Grain Initiative because there was significant developments on both. And then we can come back round and perhaps discuss some of the long-range missile issues. I've broken these air defense topics up into kind of chunks that I can populate the nest with. I think what I'll do is I'll just highlight each of the items per chunk, and then I'll open it up to any sort of accumulated comments or questions that they inspire, and that way we can group the comments together. Starting with the first item in the nest, this was fairly recent. There may have been developments in the last 2-3 hours I haven't heard of, but latest was this CNN article in the tweet by Status 6, the CNN article where apparently U.S. defense officials and congressional staffers have told CNN that Ukrainian troops have actually used Patriot systems to shoot down a distant Russian fighter jet. Now, as far as is publicly known, the only recent shootdowns were the aircraft shot down 2 or 3 days ago when they took out the two, what was it, an Su-34 and an Su-35?
It was an Su-34 fullback, an Su-35 with its escort, and then 2 Mi-8 helicopters with EW suites.
Right. So it's not clear. Those are the ones that are known. Whether Patriot was in use far earlier and perhaps it's reference to an earlier incident isn't clear, but this was an interesting development because there was uncertainty or mystery around what had struck those and whether it was Russian friendly fire or otherwise. But John, you have an opinion on it, so I'm going to break my rule and go to you.
Random. I think I heard you say earlier something about an Russian aircraft shot down about near Belgorod. Did I hear you correctly? And can you elaborate on that? Trust me, this is relevant.
Are we talking about the ones that we're talking about right now?
Well, so there was obviously the 4 aircraft, 2 fixed wing, 2 rotary wing, that were shot down, a week ago now, near Bryansk. But I thought I heard you say earlier at the very beginning that a Russian aircraft was shot down on the Russian side of the border near Belgorod.
No, I was talking about that. I can go back and confirm and see if there was a new aircraft that was shot down. There might have been something shot down over Belgorod, but I'll double check on that.
Okay, because I heard some things through non-public channels, and I wanted to see if there was any, public confirmation of that.
Well, John,
a verification of it.
Were you just checking with random in general, or were you inspired by this comment about the Patriot system?
Well, I'd heard some discussion that something may have been shot down in Belgorod earlier today, and I hadn't seen any, open source verification of it. So I heard him mention that, and so I wanted to clarify and get some follow-up on that.
Gotcha. Okay, so continuing to run through the air defense topics, there's this idea that the Patriot may actually have downed a jet, which is interesting. I'll just put it up. I know it would be ideal if I could give you, whether some of these sources are correct or not. But I saw this floating around in discussion. The second item in the nest, it's in German, so you have to translate it if you're interested. But it's an aircraft, like a knowledgeable Air Force type account that is making the argument that the shoot downs near Bryansk may actually have been AMRAAMs. And so when we last discussed it, we had talked about how it seemed like they were significant strikes given the damage to the aircraft. Probably not man pads, but whether it was Ukrainian air defense or Russian air defense was uncertain, and there was still scope for it to potentially have been air-to-air. However, it wasn't clear that the Ukrainians had had time to integrate air-to-air, and there's been no specific announcement about air-to-air being provided. So this theory up there, the German tweet, it may be out there, but it is the argument for why, or it's one of the better arguments for why it could possibly have been AMRAAM missiles. So consider that, at your leisure. Third item up in the nest, a tweet by Thomas Steiner, where he's talking about the availability of Pack 2 versus Pack 3. And he's made the argument that Ukraine really needs the Pack 3 for its systems, and that Pack 2 is insufficient for the threats that are being thrown at it based on the number of munitions per launcher or per battery, that the Russians are throwing enough of volume that they really need the higher capacity of the Pack 3. And so he breaks down there about, are there any more Patriot systems that could be provided? And essentially his answer is no, the Army needs all that they're using, and that production has been committed for quite some time. Although it's doubtful that we'll get to the more general equipment updates, but there has also been news that Patriot munitions are now planned to be manufactured in Germany. So down the road, there will be increasing capacity for some of these types of systems, but just the idea is there aren't any extra systems floating around right now. Going on to the fifth item back, there was some debate when that video went out of what most people believe it was a Patriot system that was firing many volleys of interceptors off. And there was debate about how much each shot cost. And some people were tossing around numbers about, if they fired 30 missiles and they cost and they cost something like $5 million each, that was an extremely expensive evening, which, I mean, it may not be, if it's 100 million versus 150 million, I'm not sure how you weigh that exactly, but this item I thought was interesting when people actually dig into the detail of, look, there's some people are floating a 5 million number, some people were floating 3.8 million, and he's explaining that no, if you break it down, when these things are ordered, there are a bunch of built-in costs, including like almost surcharges to try to ensure that there is production capacity kept up. So they're like fixed costs almost that are allocated per missile. But that the actual cost per individual missile is really more like 3.3 million. And that's for the PAC-3, which I understand is the more expensive of the two variants. And to that end, the sixth or seventh item back in the nest is a tweet by Air Power. And it's an explanation of some detail of the distinction between, so you have PAC-2 and you have PAC-3, PAC-3 being more modern. And that within PAC-3, there is the CRI and there is the MSE as two different munitions. I think CRI stands for something like Cost Reduction Initiative, and MSE stands for something like Multi-Segment Enhancement. I'm getting thumbs down. So John will explain it to us. But
missile segment enhancement. Close.
Missile, so not multi. Apologies. Missile segment enhancement. And that there are distinctions. They do slightly different things, but they also have different costs. And so depending on what munitions were being used, I've seen several knowledgeable accounts say that there isn't evidence of the MSE being available. So the suspicion is that it is PAC-3 CRI that is being used, which goes into that question of what is the total cost of this big volley. Just before we get to hands, last 2 points, if you have a look up in the nest, there is a tweet by Guy Plopsky. It's like the seventh back. So Guy is a very knowledgeable Air Power account, and he wrote up some sort of word of mouth that's going around about how Russia may be executing its enemy air defense suppression of enemy air defense patrols, and suggesting that they're run a little less conventionally in that only one anti-radiation missile is apparently carried per aircraft, and that really it's more about deterrence than the idea that they're very actively hunting. And he included some details suggesting that these aircraft also have to, when an emitter comes online that they think may be a target, they have to go and get specific permission to fire. They don't just have sort of freedom to engage, which may delay if these emitters come on for very short periods of time so that they miss opportunities. So those were, since we're discussing air defense, generally I thought it was worth looking at the flip side of it on what are Russian tactics to hunt these things. And then finally, in this little block, whatever this eighth item back, it's a tweet by Intel Schizo. And he was the one, several people noted that the Russians have arrested 3 different researchers who work on some of the Russian more advanced missiles. And there is a suggestion that some of these arrests aren't out of a legitimate concern about any, like treasonous activity, but that to a degree, some of it is political theater to suggest that it may have been a research failure that is contributing to the fact that their, vaunted some of their most advanced missiles are failing to defeat the Western air defense systems. And Schizo, several have covered it, but Schizo is the only one I saw who actually went out and linked to the letter that was written by a group of missile researchers, colleagues of those arrested, essentially saying, hey, we can't do our work if we don't know what the rules are, and anything we do is at risk of potentially getting us arrested for treason, which is kind of them ignoring the fact that it's likely political. But I figure since we're covering the scope of air defense, looking at details of the systems, Russian suppression techniques, plus now these political knock-on effects for researchers were all worth covering. So we'll go around to hands. I think Aaron may have been first and then random. Go ahead, Aaron.
So this is, I put in the nest there. One thing that Ben B had put out. Now it's called UAPosition.com. And so this is where they're stating that the Russians plan to create a new elite aviation group, and they call it Storm. And now with direct subordination directly to Moscow. And so this is here. This Storm group is going to be in direct communication and ready to go, like within minutes to hit certain targets. And I'm thinking that this is a possibility where we could see these guys going after Air Force bases, and what they've been possibly what we might see is more the suppression of enemy air defense, trying to get the most advanced SAM systems, air defense units. So this is the task force I was talking about, is that these guys, they're forming this new elite group, and it's probably it could be multi-mission. We don't know what they're going to do, but if they're able to form this, what's their main goal here? And there's some interesting theories out there. I've got a bunch of theories, but yeah, that's that article where we're thinking that maybe they're going to try to hit some critical long-range infrastructure that Ukraine has been getting. Maybe not, but that's the fog of war. So I just want to put that there.
Yeah, I appreciate you following up on the item you mentioned earlier. I'll definitely have a look at it. We'll go to random and then JJ.
Yeah, so I went digging for John because I did mention something about Belgorod earlier today. The Belgorod air defense was active, and there's a lovely photo of smoke cloud that looks like a rake. But I can't confirm or deny anything with that. And for OPSEC reasons, I'm just going to put this as a purely hypothetical question. Say you are a country constantly under major air attack, and this is towards John, and you have, a friend that has like a fly swatter that can go up to 35 kilometers away, and the nearest region is about 10. Would you be able to shoot, say, anything down with that if it came close enough? Just a hypothetical. This is not just a whole totally hypothetical question.
Well, let me turn that around and ask, well, what if you had a fly swatter with a range of 160 kilometers?
I think you could get the fly over the neighbor's fence.
Okay. I think it was JJ, and then we'll go to our new speaker. Go ahead, JJ.
Thanks, Michael. This is tangentially related to what you were talking about in terms of the costs of the missiles and the damage to the Patriot system, but wholly OSINT related, because as that happened the other night, I was watching in real time a narrative start to take shape on Twitter, and sure enough, and I don't remember what the keywords were, but as ID10T and I talked about the other day in one of his spaces, I just took that block of text and punched it into Twitter search. And sure enough, I saw like 20, 30, 40, 50 accounts all saying the same thing, trying to push a narrative with regard to the cost of these missiles and whether it was a waste to be using it. So I just thought that was anecdotally interesting and something to watch for in the future.
Yep. There are definitely misinformation tactics afoot. Undeniably, it is expensive. But the reason I highlight it is just paying attention to the details matters. And so even if you want to make an argument about whether it's cost effective, I think it is, because it's the value of what it's defending on the ground. But I really want people to be using the correct numbers. And if somebody has just casually looked at a report without actually trying to look at the accounting, that annoys me, because I did my undergrad in finance.
Before we go to the next hand, Michael, I did want to make one other thing, because I know I did bring up something to John earlier that wasn't Belgorod. It was occupied Donetsk. There was a very loud bang there in the occupied region of Donetsk tonight. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what it was, but it was big enough to make car alarms go off. So there's that.
Okay, so we're getting little real-time updates. Hopefully you guys can piece it together. We have a new speaker, Cossack. Would you like to go ahead?
Oh, yes. I want to talk about the Enduring Shield air defense. It's the new air defense made by Dynetics in the U.S., and they're planning to use the AIM-9X missile as their interceptor. So this air defense is just starting production, and it would be better if the first lot is deployed to Ukraine instead of the U.S. military, because when it will be deployed in a real air defense environment, which will not be and which cannot be replicated in a training exercise, then both the United States and Ukraine will benefit. And it has a new miniature hit-to-kill missile made by Lockheed Martin, which would be the cheapest interceptor ever. I mean, ever, because it doesn't have a explosive warhead. Instead, it uses kinetic energy to destroy the incoming threat. And it would be a very compact and cheap missile, because it is made that way by Lockheed. So I think we should be talking about this air defense. Let me say its name again, the Enduring Shield.
That's an interesting point. I'm sympathetic to the idea. I know that, for example, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine may actually have gotten one of the first operational versions of the German EEST. So the idea that they're getting brand new, not deployed by anybody else systems, supports this. Just before I go to hands, it feeds into the next sort of block I wanted to talk about, which is the additional sets of systems that are arriving. So just to highlight them quickly, second item in the nest, the French-Italian SAMP-T air defense system, which was reportedly delivered a few days ago, has now been deployed. At the same time, I think most of us will have heard that along with this big German commitment of, I think it was 2.9 billion, there are 6 more TRML-4D radar systems, which are apparently are regarded as very helpful, and that additional radar systems are thought to be one of the key items that will be necessary in the offensive. I don't know whether these 6 will be available when this offensive begins, but it's great that they're expanding that capacity. The fourth item back in the nest was the note that a lot of these systems can be integrated. So the suggestion was that by things like EEST, NASAMS, and HAWK can be integrated together in various ways. And this called to my mind the idea, forgive me if I forget the acronym, I think it's called the IBCS, Integrated Battle somethings. Yeah, John may speak to this, but I'm hoping to inspire him. Then there's rumor that the IBCS, which is a new sort of integration system, may just be coming available to the U.S. military now, and there's speculation that it may be the sort of thing that is ideal for Ukraine. So just as Cossack is suggesting the Enduring Shield system may go, the IBCS, there's some rumor it may go as well. So John, did you want to speak to any of that?
Yes. So IBCS, it is the Integrated Air and Missile Defense Battle Command System. It is one of our latest. It's one of our latest pieces of kit and technology. It's more or less a command and control platform, like a software suite and management system with some associated physical infrastructure, primarily what's known as an engagement operations center, as well as a series of relays, IFC and integrated fire control network relays that are used to connect various different assets to the overall IBCS network. Per some DoD filings, we have delivered an IBCS engagement operations center to Ukraine. I haven't seen it referenced outside in public sources outside of that one budget filing, but it seems that we did provide that. Ukraine will be the first operational user of that system, as far as I'm aware. We delivered Poland's first two engagement operations centers, I believe, a couple months ago. They were originally scheduled to become the first operational user sometime this summer. And I believe the U.S. Army was going to become the second operational user later this year, potentially early next year. So Ukraine has become the first to use that system operationally, and that is one of our latest brand new, most Gucci pieces of tech and kit.
Well, that's great. I didn't know that there was confirmation it hadn't been provided. I had only seen speculation, so that's handy. We'll go back to Ukrainian Cossack. Go ahead.
Information about the MEADS air defense. It has been advertised by Lockheed Martin, and as far as I can see, it's deeply connected with the IBCS, because that's the integrated air defense battle management, and the entire purpose of MEADS is to make an integrated air defense with the entire NATO alliance, to use every asset in combination with each other, so nothing is dysfunctional.
We'll go back to John and then to ID10T.
Are you referring to, did you say MEADS or MEADS, which is the SAM system? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the MEADS, MEADS, made by Lockheed Martin.
Right. So unfortunately, MEADS was canceled a couple years ago, and my understanding, the program is effectively dead. There's no more technical work being performed on it. It does not exist at this point. It has been replaced by a number of other programs, one of which is Enduring Shield in the U.S., and then I'm not exactly sure what Germany decided to replace their end of the program with. But as far as I'm aware, that program has been effectively dead for a couple of years. It has not been funded in a while.
So, John, quickly, I guess because it was Cossack's original question, do you have any sense whether there is potential for some elements of Enduring Shield to be transferred to Ukraine?
So I suspect not. So for the AIM-9X, if we just want to talk Sidewinder in general, I'm concerned that the U.S. may be unwilling to send some of our latest air-to-air missiles, specifically the AIM-9X and the AIM-120D. We've already provided the AIM-120B, which is a quite old version of the AMRAAM for use with NASAMS. If we wanted to provide Sidewinder, if we wanted to, increase the robustness of that short-range point defense capability, Ukraine has received a number of NASAMS 3 launchers as well as NASAMS 3 fire direction centers. Those should be compatible with the Sidewinder, so if we were to provide some version of Sidewinder, they can already use that without too much extra work from their existing NASAMS systems. The U.S. has invested pretty heavily in ordering additional NASAMS batteries from Raytheon and Kongsberg under USAI, Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, I believe. We have we have 8 on order, I think, under USAI. We have 6 on order under USAI from the U.S. Canada is footing the bill for a 7th. And then right now we're working to get an additional 2 batteries from Norway, directly from Norway, in addition to the 2 batteries that we've already delivered. So that brings the total up to 11, with 2 currently in theater, 7 contracted under USAI, and 2 kind of potentially coming sooner from Norway. Those can be equipped with Sidewinder if need be. I just, given how much we're investing into NASAMS specifically, I don't see it. It doesn't seem likely that we'd be willing to diverge to an enduring shield for Ukraine, as nice a piece of kit as it would be.
Well, it is nice to hear that at least some momentum is building on the NASAMS side of things. ID10T, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple side asterisks. Now, the IBCS, something that affords is a center brain, and that collaborates all the other elements that, though they can work independently, and there's communication lines, link 16, between them, the IBCS is the focal point of integration. If you're bringing in a new system or new NASAM, you want it to communicate with the IBCS. That's a powerhouse of situational awareness that it brings to the table to Ukraine, and that they have it is phenomenal. Now, the other side asterisk that I want to bring up, you may hear about something requiring a software update. And I've seen some talk on Twitter. The HIMARS, for example, just received a software update. Yes, it's active. This falls under the line of knowing what's normal. That's normal. This is a situation that there's a lot of intelligence and a lot of data being offered in Ukraine right now, and that's being processed and analyzed by the manufacturers, and that is then forming new updates for these systems. So be it the HIMARS, be it the Patriot system, be it the IBCS, don't raise your eyebrow too big if you see something about a software glitch or something to that effect. This is a bit of an experimental environment, and the software updates are normal. Just wanted to touch on
that. Thanks for that. Last point in this block, and then I'll have one more quick block on air defense. Last point on this one, it's the fifth item back. It's this tweet links to an article from the Jerusalem Post. I hadn't seen this until it was tweeted out 3 days ago. I hadn't seen it until reviewing this matter this afternoon. And apparently a U.S. general has said that the Iron Dome system could be available for use in Ukraine if the United States wanted to request it. I don't know the nuances of that. I'm just wondering if anybody has any insight. It doesn't seem that straightforward in that Israel has seemed very reluctant to provide these. Exit, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was a correction issue shortly after that, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was that issued it, but they essentially said that that wasn't what he meant to say. It's that if the U.S. required an Iron Dome for some of their needs, it would be available to them, but not that it would be available to Ukraine. And I will go and try and find the resource for that.
Okay, I had only come across it this afternoon at all, and so I hadn't seen that update. I appreciate the confirmation. Okay, I'm just putting the last block on air defense up in the nest, and these are some points, sort of implications from the ability to intercept the Kinzhal and these related waves of missiles. The first item, let's just make sure it's actually populated for you guys. May just take a moment. The first item I was actually curious to ask John about. It's a tweet he had put out about the theory that the damage to the Patriot system may actually have been the result of a dud interceptor. It was a video that appeared, imagery appeared to show an interceptor going up, making a U-turn, and then coming right back down. I haven't been following all the nuances of it, John. Do you still think that dud theory on damage is the right one?
So there have been a couple of proposed explanations. Just Occam's razor, the simplest, just starting out without looking at any of the evidence, is just falling debris raining down on the battery. That's probably the simplest explanation. Another is that obviously once you start looking at specific pieces of evidence, there is the video, the images that show what appear to be a PAC-3 CRI looping back around and impacting somewhere near the launch site. That is a known issue with Patriot, also with some other SAM systems. There's plenty of very, very funny videos of it happening to various Russian surface-to-air missile systems, but this has been documented with Patriot specifically, previously in Saudi service. There's some pretty dramatic videos of 1 or 2 incidents of this on YouTube. I'd say that's entirely plausible, both just in terms of it happening, as well as it, causing minor but ultimately insignificant damage to the launch site. Both of those are entirely plausible. Somebody posted that it was I think somebody from Jane's posted that they had heard from one of their sources that it was caused by flying roof tile and roof tile shards that had been caused by debris impacting a nearby building. That was another item that was circulating. I've heard some conflicting stuff through private channels, so I'm not really sure at this point what I would assess the cause to be. It definitely looks like an interceptor came back and impacted the launch site, although it's possible that that could be not the mechanism that was responsible for the damage, that there could have been more than one thing at play, and the interceptor impact is actually completely harmless, and, there could have been falling debris. There's a number of different explanations. I'm not uber convinced by any of them at this point, just because of how much conflict between the various different proposed causes is.
It'll just fall into one more of those mysteries that are definitely building up in terms of we may never know exactly what caused it. But that imagery you found of what appeared to be a dud interceptor certainly made, while it was always a possibility, it made it seem, plausible, moving from possibility to plausibility.
I mean, it's not the first time it's happened either. I mean, because there's a video from Saudi Arabia that had a misfire at one time.
Right. That's a good point. So moving on to a couple of other implications, and I will get to hands in a moment. Sorry, I see you. I just want to work through a few things. Other implications from the damage there. So the second item in the nest, I'm seeing several people post that there are sort of hunts ongoing for webcam systems in Ukraine that specifically in Kyiv that are active and may be disclosing operational security information to the broader internet. And there's sort of a scrubbing and a monitoring that's going on now. And many of those are being taken offline. So that process is ongoing. Third item back, many of you will have heard the controversy regarding those who shared the webcam footage, and that there was, sort of public shaming and, lots of negative feedback on Ukrainian social media with regard to people who were sharing it, not only out of danger to the system, but also, if you're a neighbor of where these systems are deployed, then if it makes it more likely an attack will be launched because the Russians know where it's been moved to, then you're putting your fellow citizens at risk, of course. And so the Ukrainians have actually gone out, and apparently there have been arrests of 6 persons in connection with the sharing of those videos. So they're taking it quite seriously. Interestingly, one woman who was highlighted most clearly, apparently she is an influencer. She also came out and put out a public apology. So, in addition, they're treating it potentially criminally, but that in addition to that, many of these people have been sort of chastened to the point of issuing public apologies. Then I wanted to get into some of the interesting implications of Ukraine talking about all of its high rate of interception. They're saying things like, well, Russia launched 18 missiles and we got all 18, or we got 16 of 17 on various nights. And so there were a few on this front up in the nest. Fourth item back, Dr. Jeffrey Lewis, who is involved in arms control and quite an expert on missiles, he has come out and talked about the history of interception of high speed, whether ballistic or otherwise missiles, noting that estimates of the number of Scuds, for example, that were intercepted after having been fired by Iraq back in 91, the estimates were extremely high, like 45 out of 47. But he said that subsequent analysis showed that the rate was actually far lower, and there were just mistakes in interpreting the number of intercepts. And so he wasn't saying that he knows that the Ukrainian interception rate as announced is incorrect. He's simply saying that historically it tends to be something that's overestimated, and that he certainly wouldn't begrudge the Ukrainians if they either, erred on the side of success when there's uncertainty, or wanted to, advertise their great rate of success. So that was one. The related to that next item, I think the sixth item back, is from Pavel Podvig, who is an expert in Russian hardware. And he similarly says that he's cautious about the intercept claim. And then interestingly, he goes into some of the implications of, does this affect the idea of nuclear deterrence with regard to tactical weapons or otherwise? And his conclusion is no, and that, in a more fulsome barrage, these systems could be overwhelmed, and that deterrence relies on the ability of some to get through. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting review in light of the implication that air defense systems may suddenly be recognized as practically more effective than, there had been uncertainty about it, and that the results are suggesting high efficacy. Final, before I go to hands, I think it's the eighth item back. It's sort of the counter to Pavel Podvig's caution about maybe they're not intercepting quite that many, is a tweet by Fabian Hoffman, who's been putting out some great detailed background on these missile systems. And he's saying that, well, if I was a Russian nuclear strategist today, I would be very worried, because we've just proven that an intercept rate of 100 is possible. And so his is the very positive interpretation of that. So I just wanted to put these, because the results of this don't affect just Ukraine, right? They affect an understanding of the balance of offense and defense, and the dynamics that go into that. So I thought it was important to highlight these different perspectives. So we'll go through hands. We'll go to John and then Cossack, and then we'll see from there. Go ahead, John.
Thank you very much. Just briefly regarding Jeffrey Lewis's thread, one thing I have to point out is that I would encourage people to be very, very skeptical of analysis concerning the capability of Patriot that references anything from the 90s. To be blunt about it, the capability of Patriot with PAC-2 in the 90s is not in any way meaningfully representative of the system in its present incarnation. I won't say anything else about that thread, because I am too strongly opinionated on the matter to provide unbiased commentary, and I'll leave it at that. But
let's just say that the Scuds that faced the Patriots in Israel during Gulf War have kind of aged as we have. So, take the fact that they've had that much amount of time, for the last 30 years or so, to improve the system.
Me doubting that Random was even alive in 1991. But
I was around.
Okay.
I was one, but I was around.
I appreciate that John has decided discretion is the better part of valor. We'll go to Cossack, and then we'll go to Aaron.
We've seen recently the cost of interception has gone to a point that people are questioning that why would we use this expensive missile to shoot down a cheap drone, and so on and so on. Even the AIM-9X missiles that are being considered for the Enduring Shield, they cost around $420,000. And there's a new missile, which is the miniature hit-to-kill. I don't know what the status is with this missile made by Lockheed, but they claim that it will cost initially $16,000, and maybe it can go down to $10,000. But the thing is, this missile is big as a Stinger, but it's much more capable. It's like the AMRAAMs used in the NASAMS. So compared to the cost and size of a man-pad missile, this can shoot down much more much more dangerous targets like the cruise missiles and the cheaper and the more high-end drones. So I don't know what its status is, but this must be pushed.
So I have a response to that real quick.
Okay, real quick.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael. But just 3 days ago, the Russian air attack, they launched 6 to 5 Kinzhals, a half a dozen of another missile interception. Basically, someone did the math and they tallied it up. The Russians spent $125 million to have only one missile get through Ukrainian air defenses, as opposed to the Ukrainians having to use only a certain amount of PAC-3 missiles, which are 4 million apiece. So this is one of the rare instances where the Russians are actually spending more to waste their missile stockpile.
Okay. We're having more hands crop up, which is great. Love the engagement. As we go through, perhaps we can keep it to like 30, 45 seconds, just because we do have a couple of other updates I want to make sure we get to. Go ahead, Aaron.
So this is certainly something that I have been thinking about as well. When you mentioned the systems that are meant to carry, tactical nuclear warheads in the deterrent phase, they're using this. If they're using the same missiles, which say, they either can carry a conventional or nuclear warhead, they're going to have to fire a heck of a lot of them for one to get through. But the problem is when it becomes nuclear, even one gets through, it is incredibly devastating. So it shows that air defense is a much bigger deterrence on the nuclear side than what we had thought of before. Is that it is a bigger player, and that is something, at least for on the Russian side of things, there's going to be systems that are going to try to negate the air defense threat as well, even more, at least for the nuclear triad. And that'd be interesting to see what our enemies and then our allies come up with as well.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see the order. I'll go to ID10T and then Gurney.
I just wanted to touch on the aspect of using Patriots to shoot down cheap drones. No. No. So there are various layers over there. NASAMS would be one. We have shipped them laser-guided APKWS, Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, slew of Stingers. Now, in the event that that's what you have, all you have is a big hammer to hit a gnat, then sometimes you have to do that. But especially with the IBCS system there, it's going to analyze all the information from a multitude of sites and select the best, highest probability of a kill. And there's algorithms involved with that to say, okay, it's going to approach over here and a Stinger can hit it, as opposed to using a multi-million-dollar missile.
Yep, fair details. That layering is important. Gurney, go ahead. Gurney, if you're with us, you're muted. Okay, we may have a connection problem there. If Gurney,
he was taken out by the Harkonnens.
Yeah, must. I watched that last night, so that's funny. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So we've covered aircraft. We've covered air defense. Maybe we'll have time to get to general long-range missiles. However, there have been some significant developments in Turkey and the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and we also have been joined by Andrew Perpetua, who is kind enough to drop by from time to time. And I had heard that coming out of his YouTube presentations, which he does Tuesday and Thursday nights, that there may be some developments around Bakhmut that we should pay attention to. So I'm going to turn it over to Exit to have a bit of a conversation about Andrew on those updates.
Andrew, thanks for joining us. In case anybody missed it, John and I and a number of other people were all in Andrew's stream on Tuesday night, and it was great fun, and they let me ask all the silly questions that I don't know the answers to because they're all military people and I'm not. And it was great. They answered them all for me, which was amazing. One of the questions I had was about Klashivka, which I hope I just said right. And it turns out there's been a whole bunch of movement around that area, and I missed your stream tonight, Andrew, and I was wondering if you could tell me what's going on there, because it looks like things just didn't work out quite well for the Russians.
Well, it's kind of uncertain exactly what is going on because there's a lot of fog of war involved here, and certain sources are like much more aggressive than others in this regard. It seems that right now the Russians are falling back to their primary / last line of defense on Klashivka, which is on the hill in the trench line that Ukraine had prepared like in 2014 or whatever. So that they're falling back to this main trench line. Behind this trench line, there is a major highway that goes south of Bakhmut, and it actually doesn't go anywhere near Klashivka, but there's a major highway that goes south from Bakhmut, and Russia has sent in a large amount of reinforcements along this highway to guard that southern flank behind Klashivka. This highway is being used to defend Zaitsev and Kodema, which are two towns that are incredibly important. They're south of Bakhmut. So right now, Russia is preparing these defenses deeper behind Klashivka. Because to be clear, for Ukraine to get to those positions, they're going to have to, capture like probably 5 towns before they can attack that place. But they're preparing defenses back there, which is kind of a bad sign for Russia. And they're kind of on their last line of defense in Klashivka itself. So that the whole area looks pretty bad for the Russians. Now, where exactly the Ukrainians are right now is kind of up for debate. They might still be about 2 or 3 kilometers from Klashivka, or some people are saying that they're only like 1 kilometer away. I'm not really sure. It's really hard to judge. There's so much cloud of war right now.
I'm sure that Exit will have some follow-on questions. I'll just note, I've put a few resources in the nest that I didn't speak to at the top of the show. So the first item, it's in, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if that's Spanish or Portuguese, but they've taken some of the Russian maps and they've done a bit of a time lapse of some of the changes of control. Klashivka, which Andrew is referring to, is sort of right in the south eastern portion there. You'll see it starts with a K. It's written in Cyrillic on this map. But this gives you a sense of how things have been changing over the last few days. Up in the nest, there was a thread by Teta Origami put out earlier today about how really the main problem remaining in the city, in his view, relates to the difference in artillery, and that essentially much of the buildings in the remaining city are just being completely destroyed. So it's not that they're losing in combat so much as Russian artillery is pushing them back, denying them very many places to defend. And then there are some other items up there, 3rd and 4th, that about how Russia appears to be moving reserves from other areas, including a unit that may have been down around Avdiivka toward the Bakhmut area, which some people are pointing to having implications when a larger scale offensive may begin. Anyway, that's all background to what's happening in Bakhmut. Exit, go ahead.
So maybe you could explain why those 2 particular towns are really important that you mentioned?
They really kind of guard the southern approach to Bakhmut. There's a hill between them in the northern part of Kodema. Now, if Ukraine can take that hill, and it's on the eastern side of the highway. This highway goes straight to Bakhmut, so it would basically mean that Ukraine controls the entire south of Bakhmut. Now, whether this is actually Ukraine's idea is like what they're planning to do is a completely different story. I think it's equally possible that they just want Russia to move as many troops into this location as possible, so that it weakens everywhere else. So those guys on that highway that I was just talking about, those are the ones who came from Avdiivka. So, but I see Colby has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Colby.
Slightly separate question that I had for John about something that you put into the nest, Michael. So if you want to continue on discussing what's going on in the front line first, by all means.
Sure. Exit, did you have more detail you wanted to get into?
I just wanted to ask, so that was south of Bakhmut, and then what's happening north of Bakhmut? Because that was very unclear the other night.
There's one town that I just temporarily forgot the name of, so I'm looking at my map. It's Sakoi Vansetti. Okay, so Ukraine is advancing on this little tiny town. It has like 2 houses in it. It's not very impressive, but it is it controls like these 2 highways that intersect at this town, and also a river. It's a pretty small river, but it's still a river. So so Ukraine is advancing on this town. They've moved up 500 meters from the north, and about a kilometer or kilometer and a half from the west, closing in on this town from both sides. So that, along with they also seem to be moving south from Minkivka towards, it's like southeast from Minkivka towards Berhivka from the northwest. So Berhivka is the town that the other offensive that they did on May 11th, they moved towards Berhivka, which is north of Bakhmut. It's one of like the suburbs, and there's also Yehidna there. So anyways, so Berhivka is on a hill, and now Ukraine is attacking that hill from the north. So if they do attack it from the north, they'd be fighting on uneven ground, because the northern part of that town is kind of flat, whereas the south is a big hill. So basically, Ukraine has moved up to the base of the hill from the south, and now they're flanking the hill in the north. Now, if Ukraine does end up taking this town, it first would break the northern defense of Bakhmut, and then it would also offer up the opportunity to then go on to attack Pereskovivka. And then, if they manage to capture that, they would be open to attack Soledar again. But again, I don't actually know if their long-term targets are to continue these attacks on and on, or if they just want to force Russia to defend Bakhmut with their honor, and then use that to attack somewhere else.
Actually, just keep going. We'll draw these details out, and then we'll move on.
I actually was just going to say, I really appreciated all the time that I spent on your stream the other night, and I would really encourage everybody else to take a listen and watch Andrew's stream, because it's really helpful to actually have the map in front of you when he's describing all of these things. And it was also really helpful to look at elevations and stuff. There's details that it's hard to explain without that actual stream and getting to see the map there. So instead of asking a whole bunch more questions, I was going to say you should definitely check out the stream from tonight. And I see Random with his hand up.
Well, just before we go to Random, to that end, I have put a link to the stream in the nest, and wanted to point out it's a great idea. Andrew's experimented with different platforms, but on YouTube, he's able to live stream, or he's able to live share his screen, so you can actually move through the maps with him, which is super helpful. And if I remember correctly, Andrew, that's every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time?
Yes, it's Tuesday and Thursday.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for coming to join us. And I do like to go back to look at your recordings on Thursday nights, even though I'm usually prepping for this. But thanks again for joining us. So I guess because we were going through some of the topics quickly, happy to move back to discuss some of the earlier items. Colby, did you want to go ahead?
Thanks. John, you didn't write this, so you may not be able to answer this question. But Michael referenced this post by Tatarigami that he put into the nest, and the implication of this this tweet here seems to be that there are things that the Ukrainian government could be doing, but are not currently doing for whatever political reasons, to really increase the pace of munitions productions, particularly artillery ammunition. And in all the discussions that you and I have had on this topic, I've been fairly impressed with Ukraine's ability to restart ammunition production under very difficult wartime circumstances. So I'm curious if you have any comment on this topic of whether there's a lot being left on the table by Ukraine, low-hanging fruit that things that could be done to increase artillery production that are, for whatever reason, not being acted on right now.
Right. So in terms of Ukrainian domestic production, there was an article that was released. I can go and try and find a link to it if people are interested in, about the Ukrainian defense industry, just the general status of it. And it would seem, if this reporting is accurate, it's from Ukrainska Pravda, that Alexander Commission, having been recently appointed to the position of Minister of Strategic Industries, he has been placed in basically direct control over the entire Ukrainian defense industry. And per this reporting, he has begun to quite dramatically turn around defense production. It referenced things like apparently he is every morning at like 8:30 a.m. local, he is calling the managers of every single munitions factory to ask if they met the previous 24-hour production targets and things like that. And it references a dramatic increase in ammunition production since he took up that position. And it was rather vague, but I believe the exact quote from the machine translated is that Ukrooborontprom, Ukraine's state defense conglomerate, is currently producing, quote, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition. It isn't clear if that's referring to, shells exclusively, shells and mortars, small arms ammunition, rockets for MRLs, etc. But it references production on the order of tens of thousands of units per month.
Thanks. That's helpful. So it would seem that there's some good further movement there, well and beyond the steps that have already been taken. Thanks.
Yeah, if we can find the Ukrainska Pravda article, that would be great. To that end, we probably won't get to the sort of general equipment topics I was hoping to, but two other items. It's not on the domestic supply question that Colby asked, but it is related. Sorry, just doing admin things. It's related. Looking in the nest, two items that came up recently. One is a post by the U.S. Transport Command regarding the quantities moved just in the last month. And apparently they have moved something like 6 million artillery shells. That came up in conversation with some folks I was talking to earlier today. And then connected to that, this was about a month ago, I guess, but South Korea has also been providing some significant quantities of artillery. But Dr. Paul's come up. I know this is a subject dear to his heart.
Michael, exactly. You nailed it. You literally stole the words from my mouth and all the thunder. So good on you. Basically, for me, my big take from it is if we were able to transport 6 million more rounds of artillery ammo, likely all calibers, my guess is that includes 152 and 122, 105 millimeter, and 155. I don't know that. That's just my assumption. And maybe even Grad MLRS rockets as well. But, I guess John and Colby are up here. Like, Colby, good to hear your voice, buddy. But, for me, my take was the World War III inventories that CJ has always talked about, like, are vast, like far greater than I ever thought. If we were truly able to transport 6 million additional rounds between April and May of this year is just like extraordinary to me. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how the math lines up in your guys' minds. For me, that's just, it's huge. And I just curious other people's thoughts on it.
Yeah, go ahead, Colby.
So I don't want to be to burst any bubbles here, but it seems to me that is most likely a typo because it just does not make any sense whatsoever. So I'm not super familiar with those graphics that U.S. Transport Command has been posting evidently there, but you can look at the pictures in the nest, and what it is, it's a comparison of two pictures, and one of them says as of April 17th of this year, and then the other one is as of May 15th of this year, so a month gap. And if you compare the two of them, you can see that there's like a fairly small incremental increase in the amount of equipment in each different category, except for artillery munitions, which went up by 6 million, which does not match up at all with any of the other increases in other equipment, which are very small incremental gains. And then you look at artillery and it's 6 million more, and that just does not line up with any of the other data we have around what quantities of ammunition are being provided to Ukraine through the the two main delivery mechanisms, PDA and USAI. So I that number does not sound correct to me, that in one single month, all of a sudden 6 million rounds of artillery ammunition were provided, on top of the 1.6 that were delivered as of April 17th. A month later, they delivered 6 million more. It doesn't make any sense to me, but maybe, I'm missing something. I'm definitely not in the loop like I used to be, but I don't know, John, what's your thoughts on that?
So when I saw that number, it seemed like a lot, and I had assumed it must include 155, 105, 152, 122, and all the various other non-standard calibers that we've presumably been doing like third-party transport for, i.e. somebody else has been procuring it from some random place, and we've been covering the transportation aspects. That had been my assumption. I hadn't seen the prior graphs, so a 6 million shell increase in a rather short period of time. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic, but that seems, I don't know, implausible to say the least.
Yeah, the only way that could possibly be correct in my mind is if they changed their metrics of how they were quantifying what they've delivered, right? Like 6 million more in 1 month to go from 1.6 to 7.6. That just doesn't make any sense unless they changed the metric where it was initially just things that the U.S. had provided themselves to things that allies had provided that they were providing transport for, and they expanded the range of calibers that applied to. I think that's probably a typo, and it should be it's 1.661 million, and then this other picture is 7.823. I feel like that should just be 1.823. That would make more sense if you compare the other categories and the scale of increase that we're seeing in the other categories. I think it's a typo.
Yeah, you're likely right. I went to the U.S. Transcom. So this was tweeted out by somebody else, but I went to the U.S. Transcom, and the graphic is true to their account, but in the replies, everybody is saying, "Hey, that number doesn't look right," but they haven't responded or taken it down in the 2 days that it's been up, so, or a day and a half. But anyway, I'll add that to the nest. They'll likely make a correction there. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, Colby and John, points well taken. What I would say is, like, with what I do for my work, anything that's put out into the public domain for something like as high, for the, I'm not talking about I work for the government or anything, but anything that's put out into the public is highly scrutinized beforehand. It's not, I don't buy into it. It's a typo. Oh, just some like klutz, fat fingered it. That's not the case here. I mean, I'd be shocked if that's the case. It can be purposeful or intentional disinformation for a lot of reasons, or it could be real or whatever. But I don't think that's a likely scenario here that the United States Department of Defense is putting out, through typo, something so significant as that. I could be wrong, and I hope I am not wrong, but I think the more likely scenario is what John said is, and what I said as well, is it's all calibers, all including, we do know that the U.S. or our allies in general are procuring, MLRS, right, for Ukraine, for the Grads and Smerch and other systems, Soviet era systems. So I think each one of those kind of counts, right? And so I think that's more likely. It might be wishful thinking, but I do know this: they do not just put out, on a whim, some college grad is putting this out there, in the public domain, something so important. So I really don't think that's the case here, but nonetheless, we'll see.
Well, they've certainly had lots of people asking them the question, so I imagine they'll respond quickly. Colby, go ahead.
Yeah, again, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but there's bad news and there's good news. So the bad news is that we got confirmation today, story by Reuters, which was later confirmed by the New York Times, that the U.S. Department of Defense is in fact very bad at math, extremely bad at math, because they had a $3 billion accounting error and overvalued the amount of equipment that was provided to Ukraine through PDA by $3 billion. The good news is that because they overvalued the equipment by $3 billion, that means that there is $3 billion more worth of equipment that can be sent to Ukraine, and then $3 billion worth of equipment that can be bought new for the U.S. Armed Forces. So lots of new stuff for both Ukraine and the United States because they made a $3 billion math mistake on their accounting. So making a typo on their graphic there does not seem so implausible to me when the guys doing the accounting over at DoD make $3 billion mistakes, but good $3 billion mistakes because Congress does not have to appropriate another $3 billion yet, at least. We've got a little bit of breathing room there. So President Biden's got some more money in the bank to send more HIMARS over to Ukraine.
In defense, Colby, they never do audits over there. They were never really good with that part.
There's a lot that the federal government is not very good at.
So it's funny because there was a debate about a month ago involving Patrick Fox, where he brought up the fact that literally the Department of Defense has never actually completed a 100% audit. Anyway, that led to some back and forth drama on Twitter. But I did add, Colby had tweeted out that Reuters article about the 3 billion mistake, so I've added that to the nest. It was on the agenda. It just we probably weren't going to get to it otherwise. In connection with that, since we're already on this topic, I'll just note the rumors that have come up in the last day that the U.S. may be considering proposing a $60 billion aid package in this September. The last package that was approved, if I'm not mistaken, was 43 billion. And based on usage rates, it seemed like that was intended to last for about 6 months. So a 60 billion package, would last the majority of a year if approved. and that timing probably is not coincidental. Hopefully to coincide with, not only the final allocations under the PASS package, but also because of the potentially changing U.S. political environment heading into the election year. But we've got lots of hands, so we'll go to John first, and then I think it was Schizo. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. I'd point out that the exact phrasing in that article wasn't $3 billion. It was at least $3 billion. So there's noted room to grow here.
I love the optimistic tone. Schizo, go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing too with that article, the overvaluation. So like this wasn't necessarily like, oh, they suck at math. I mean, it's definitely funny. The logic that they had used when they were doing the calculations initially was they were valuing everything that was being sent at the current market price of that equipment versus, the price of when the equipment was purchased and like actual value. So they were, like scraping up an M113 and then being like, oh, this is worth, like $10 million. I'm just throwing a random number out, for example. And it's like in actuality, that M113 might only be worth $2 million. So that was, good intention, I guess, in terms of the, like how they were calculating the value of equipment in aid. But obviously that piled up significantly. And good thing that they caught that error. But this wasn't necessarily like a simple, like, oh, they suck at math. It was just the pathway that they chose in determining the value. Somebody in DoD, I guess, decided to disagree with that assessment and decided, no, it's, we haven't given, X amount of dollars. We're actually at least $3 billion under budget.
That's fair. I don't know enough. I've never had cause to look at it, but I suspect that there are probably pricing methodologies specified, if not in legislation, then in their their protocols. I just wonder if it was a judgment call thing or whether somebody just applied the wrong one. So I'm not sure if it's a change in mind or whether it was an outright mistake. Would be interesting to dig into. I think it was Aaron and then Gurney. Go ahead, Aaron.
So I think talking about ammunition, you've got, sorry, jumping in again. Ukraine, with the help of the West, can start producing more of their own ammunition. They're already producing, 152 millimeter of the Russian caliber domestically in Ukraine. But I think there needs to be factories set up for in Ukraine for 155. I mean, it would actually benefit the Ukrainians to be able to manufacture more of their own ammunition and have more jobs available to the civilian market there. I mean, it would actually help the Western Alliance as well with, of course, it would take some of the pressure off our backs as well. I mean, I think that's something that could be coming in the next year. It'd be nice. But, I mean, it's great we're giving enough to Ukraine. I'm just saying it would help their supply line as well.
Thanks, Aaron. Go ahead, Gurney.
So I was just trying to make sure, are we talking about this round increase from Dr. Paul and everything that's happened since then based on that one slide from Transcom? Do I have that correct, or is there a different source?
Well, we've talked about several different aspects. There was a back and forth for about 3 minutes there where Colby pointed out that reality exists, and I double-checked the original. So that was about that one slide. Some of the other points have been, unrelated, but
But yeah, sorry. So that 6 million number jump, I'm just saying the original source, is it just, am I missing something? Is it just based off that one US Transcom slide, or was there another source?
No, that was the one. Somebody saw it and brought it up in some chats I was engaged in as I was prepping the slides. I was like, oh, great, 6 million, which wasn't sufficient review. But I don't think that there has been any separate statement. And now several people on the Transcom account have said to them, that doesn't make sense. So I suspect they'll just come out and say, yeah, our mistake.
Sure. Okay. All right. Now that I just want to make sure I was on the same page for the source document. I'm sure there could be multiple ways to interpret that slide. I think it's a little weird that it's one single slide and there could be a lot of errors with it that's been mentioned before. But even if it was accurate, it could still be truthful potentially. I mean, right, the slide itself doesn't say to Ukraine, it says to European partners. So we could be missing a reallocation, a movement of stockpiles and rotation, first in, first out, et cetera, et cetera. So there could have been a movement by Transcom to different European allies in a rebalancing sense or repositioning that could still make the slide true. And on top of that, obviously the slide could be a mistake or untrue. But I just wanted to say that.
To paraphrase the meme, what's Scott AFB doing?
I suppose that, yeah, that would still be an awful lot of transfer to a European ally, but I suppose you never know. That would beg the question, though, if you were moving that much to a European ally, to what end, and why isn't it winding up in Ukraine?
Well, to add to that, I'm just before February of 22, right? Army pre-position forward stocks, right? I would assume we've used many of some of the pre-position stocks, and we've also, during the summer or last autumn, there was a transfer from Israel that wasn't disclosed at the time, and then was disclosed. And there was a big PR fiasco with that. I would think that statement could both be true and untrue at the same time in that slide. And since it's a single source, I'm just going to take it with a grain of salt. But movement of those stocks to, say, Poland or to, say, Germany, again, I have no reason to believe this has happened, but that could be interpreted as movement to an ally. However, it could still be retained as a U.S. pre-positioned stock, meaning the U.S. retains control of that, but the slide is not inaccurate to say it's been transferred to an ally because it's in an allied country, right? Both things can be true.
It is possible. So I guess the upshot is that everybody listening to the space, if you know any senior officers in U.S. Transcom, burn all your favors, use all your leverage. We have to have this sorted. We are just at the not time I would normally wrap up. We've covered, as is usual and predictable to all but me, 25% of the content I had kind of prepared for. I did want to do a brief update on the Turkish election and the Black Sea Grain Initiative. However, Exit is telling me that just is silly and that she should just hold a space for all the details. I'm wondering, maybe Exit, as a precursor or a teaser for your space on these details, can you just give us the upshot? Was there an election in Turkey?
I think there was indeed an election in Turkey, although it doesn't appear to have final results, as happens. And there was an agreement to continue shipping grain out of Ukraine, but again, there's no actual results from that and no ships shipping. So, I mean, there's a lot going on. It's a little complicated and maybe needs its own space.
And as always, apologies to the People's Republic of China. We ran out of time.
So I will hold a space, probably Saturday sometime, because I don't think there's anything else booked then. And I'll let y'all know when it's posted.
Perfect. Sorry, I may have been trying to speak to a muted mic for a moment. It was Random was joking about China being the missed topic. It wasn't actually on the schedule today. What actually has wound up being missed the last couple of times is economics and some diplomacy stuff. There have been some developments, like there's an African peace mission going to Ukraine and Russia. There's a Vatican peace mission. The G7 is holding talks on a potential peace summit. Like that issue of peace appears to be having a moment. I'll also note that if you look at the second and third items back in the nest, we didn't get to them today. There was some detail on long-range missile provision, including the news that France would provide the Scalp. However, then it came out in French publications. If you click on the tweet titled "Missiles," that in fact, no, it's only that France is considering providing the Scalp, and apparently it's not a commitment. I was also going to kind of get into the war zone, started talking about, well, there's a missile called the Alarm that might be perfect. There are these other missiles that Germany has developed that can be launched from the HIMARS M270 that are quite interesting. There was also the third item back in the nest. I saw the other day that John had confirmed that the Hrim, or how do you pronounce it, John? Do you pronounce it the Ukrainian Hrim, or is it Grim?
So Grim is not a word in general. It's somebody took the Ukrainian word Hrim and mixed it with the Russian word Grom and produced Grim. Sapson is the actual name, but Grim 2 is the name for the export version, the reduced ranged export version.
Right, but that was a very interesting tweet you had found a tweet you put out noting that Ukraine is now saying they have actually used it in combat.
Per some source that Ukrainska Pravda, I believe, found, or no, sorry, not Ukrainska Pravda. I don't know what I'm about. Army Inform, which is like the media outlet supported directly by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. They were publishing that it has been, achieved operational capability and has been used in combat. I hope it's true. I don't have any confirmation besides that one article, but it's an interesting data point.
Yeah, well, it's certainly been speculated about a few times as an option in the mix, and so it's probably more reliable than that Transcom artillery number. But you make a great point. If it's only from one source, confirmation would be handy. I wonder if we could reach out to Army Inform to see if they could, get a more effective confirmation. Maybe make it not anonymous. Or yeah, John, go ahead.
So Ukrainska Pravda also referenced Sapson or Krim 2 in their piece on the Ukrainian defense industry. And they according to some sources on the program, they basically said that they confirmed that work on the program was still progressing, but basically everybody refused to comment on the status of it. I suspect that getting any kind of firm confirmation on this is going to be enormously difficult because it's almost certainly a very heavily classified weapons program at this point.
Right. And so I'm bringing these items up just as the highlight because it was John had observed that point, and John, has lots of expertise on missiles, so I didn't want to miss that one. I will use it as an opportunity to note that if you want to look at the other 2/3 material that I developed, sort of by category, if you click on those items in the nest, any of the first three, that takes you to that general thread that starts with the invitation to the space, and you can always look at the reading material in the background. I will kick some of it forward if it doesn't stale date, and hopefully we'll get to it eventually. Maybe I'll have to hold an emergency bond to space. We'll go to Exit as co-host and then to Aaron. Go ahead, Exit.
I just was going to note that the article that John has been referencing, Jacoby put it in the nest, and it's 4 back, and you can click on it there and read through. It's a good read. Make sure you use your auto-translate.
that being the article about Kamyshin whipping the Ukrainian domestic industry into shape. Aaron, go ahead.
So, John, I want to ask you what your thoughts are on the Vika system, which is, of course, the Ukrainian indigenously developed BM-30 Smerch with the GPS-guided systems. The GPS-guided missiles, it's 160-kilometer range. They have a few of the systems. I'm not sure how many they have yet, but it had just come out within the last year, and it's at least to my knowledge, and I'm very impressed with it. It's what this is a 300 millimeter system. It's the same millimeter rocket system as the BM-30 Smerch, although this is a much better, much longer range and more sophisticated guided version of it, which is it's an awesome system. I've been reading more and more up on it. Wanted to hear your opinion of it.
Right. So Vilha M, that has been around for a couple years now. The issue previously was that prior to the invasion, I believe only 100 to 200 rockets had been procured because there wasn't a pressing need for it, because 300 millimeter MRLs had been prohibited in proximity to the occupied portions of Donbass as part of the Minsk II agreement. So Ukraine couldn't use them per the terms of that agreement. So they only bought like 100 of them, and production capacity wasn't really substantial. They've since begun to scale it up, and it is actually in production at some scale now. Depending on the specific variation of it, has a range that I've seen quoted between 120 to 150 kilometers. GPS INS guidance that seems to be used with, I guess, with as much frequency as you would expect for a weapon system like this that is being reserved for, specifically valuable targets beyond the range of Gimler's or other fires assets, and that is available in limited quantity. I haven't seen any good figures on how well it's actually performed in practice. One thing that has slightly concerned me is I've seen videos of them being launched. Just looking at the way that those motors burn makes me a little bit nervous. They are ejecting some concerningly large particles in their exhaust, which makes me think that the propellant grain is not necessarily the best, either formulated chemically or perhaps the geometry or structural properties of that solid propellant grain aren't quite where they need to be. So that makes me a little bit nervous. But beyond that, I haven't seen any reports on how well they've performed in practice. I believe the circular error probable that they claim is 30 meters, which is okay. It's certainly not Gimler's. Gimler's is order of magnitude smaller, but I mean, it's better than an unguided munition, certainly.
Now, that's the thing, is I knew that they were experimental before the war, but then when they come out in more of a mainstream and at least used a few times back in the fall, it was exciting to see that. And the Vilha, I always call it Vika, but it's Vilha. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think then that's it for tonight. Thank you to everybody for coming to join us tonight. Thank you in particular to our speakers. I think all of our speakers are dedicated to following the events in Ukraine. They're all generally interested in OSINT. I would encourage you to check out all their profiles and consider giving them a follow. In particular, I appreciated the update from Andrew Perpetua, and great thanks to my co-host tonight, Exit and John. It's terrific that so many people who are interested in this are producing their content. So a couple of reminders. Up in the Nest, our next conversation will be Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. New York time. You can set your reminder, hopefully you'll join us then, that Andrew does do his YouTube streams Tuesday and Thursday nights at 8, and a link to that is also up in the Nest. And then, of course, John does a great job working with the account Toshni. And so a link to their most recent conversation is up in the Nest. And they generally hold their sessions Sunday afternoons at 2 p.m. Just before we go on. And so I'd encourage you guys to check out all that content. I think there's a lot of great work being done out there. That is it. And hopefully you'll join us all on Sunday afternoon. Everybody have a good night.